September 3rd, 1978. Do all the outfitters in Africa do this for every client that comes hunting? Henry wondered in disbelief as he stared at the preparations that had been made for his arrival. He had expected a camp similar to the ones he and Alan Kane made for themselves when they went to Idaho. What he got was something altogether different. A 10 by 10 concrete slab had been poured, and a tent erected over it. It housed a metal-framed bed and a nightstand made of sticks lashed together. A fresh vegetable garden had been planted months before, so that fresh salads could be served with every meal. The cook tent was well stocked, and even included a freezer that ran on propane. A fire near the cook tent was tended 24 hours a day, so that hot water for bathing and washing clothes was available at all times. The water came from a 200-gallon wheeled storage tank that the crew kept filled with regular trips to the river. A 5-gallon can with a screw valve and shower head attached hung suspended from a tree limb near Henry's tent and was filled with hot water whenever Henry wanted a shower. A 55-gallon drum of water was lashed into the crook of a tree 10 feet above the ground and was piped to a flush toilet at the back of the camp. Ray had asked Henry for his dirty clothes from the trip over, and they were washed immediately. By the end of the month, Henry would realize that he could have gone on the safari without a change of clothes, for the crew washed, dried, ironed, with an iron that was filled with hot coals, and folded his laundry for him every night. The hunting camp that had been built for Henry Bowman was in the Charara Valley, on a 1-million-acre tract of government land south of the Zambezi River. The land was not part of a hunting concession, and Ray Johnson had never been in the area prior to 12 weeks before, although he had been familiar with its reputation. Most modern safaris in Africa were held on hunting concessions similar to the 200,000-acre tract Ray Johnson leased, which was 200 miles away from where he and Henry Bowman were now standing. The professional hunter paid the government an annual fee to lease the raw land and built his own accommodations on it. The government told him how many animals of which species could be killed in that area each year. The professional hunter then offered hunts to clients and charged them a daily rate for his services, which were all inclusive except for trophy fees. The client paid the daily rate directly to the professional hunter. He also paid the government a non-refundable trophy fee in advance for each animal he intended to hunt. Trophy fees varied by animal. In 1978, a warthog or baboon in Rhodesia cost $75, a male Cape buffalo $500, and a trophy elephant $3,000. Ray Johnson's daily rate was $400, typical for a recognized professional hunter in that area. Countries with well-managed game departments, such as Rhodesia, would authorize the killing of only that number of animals, which would ensure that the herds continued to thrive. This meant that 1 rhino, 3 or 4 lions, and perhaps 10 elephants could be shot each year on a 200,000-acre concession. Limits for thin-skinned plains game were, of course, much higher. The game department typically erred on the side of caution, and every few years the numbers were temporarily raised on those species which were becoming too numerous. The professional hunter received none of the trophy fee and had only his daily rate to sustain his business. Because of this, and because the dangerous game was so plentiful that good specimens could be found in 2 or 3 days, professional hunters had minimum safari lengths they set for clients wishing to hunt large, dangerous game. A client could go on a 6 or 7 day safari if he would be satisfied with a half-dozen head of thin-skinned plains game such as impala, duiker, oryx, and bushbuck. If he wanted to hunt elephant, buffalo, rhino, lion, or leopard, however, his professional hunter would require at least a 2-week hunt. Customers wanting to hunt several of the big 5 often signed up for safaris of a month or more. The safari Henry Bowman was about to undertake was somewhat different than the norm, however. Each year, the Rhodesian government held auctions which were open to all professional hunters licensed in that country. The authorities would auction off the hunting rights to large tracts of government land that were not being leased out as hunting concessions on a one-season basis. Again, the game department stipulated, in advance of the auction, the number and type of animals that could be killed in that area in the forthcoming season, but the auction price included all trophy fees. The successful bidder could then split up the permitted game and hold several safaris each at an all-inclusive price. This practice served several functions. First, elephant, buffalo, and lion populations were kept at levels which minimized the animals' consumption of the crops and residents in adjacent populated areas. Second, the government received additional revenues which it used for game management and anti-poaching measures, although how these funds were ultimately used was usually startling to the uninitiated. Third, the customers ended up spending a little less money on a hunt, although the accommodations were more Spartan, and the professional hunter made a little extra that season if he scheduled everything intelligently. This was the trade-off every professional hunter analyzed when bidding in the annual auction. Scheduling hunts in the new location required setting up a temporary hunting camp with all its attendant support crew of cooks, skinners, and laborers, and took time away from the existing hunting concession where all facilities were already set up. Ray Johnson had made the winning bid for the Chirara Valley area on the strength of a 10-minute phone conversation with Max Collins' nephew. Henry had said he was ready to go on a big hunt, and Ray had promised he'd give Henry a hell of a deal providing you're willing to shoot all the game on the ticket, so I don't have to run 4 or 5 safaris with 4 or 5 different clients. Ray had also seen to it that the temporary camp provided almost as many comforts as did the permanent camp on his hunting concession, and it was this attention to detail which now amazed the young client. Okay, you're settled in and you know where everything is. Let's see this bloody cannon I've been hearing about. Ray Johnson, raised in Colorado and educated in Boston, had adopted some of the phraseology of his current Rhodesian peers. God damn, he said with feeling when Henry opened the aluminum case he had had made for his 4-bore double. Makes my 600 Holland look like a matchstick. Yeah, I know what you mean, Henry said with a sigh. I used to shoot those medium bores too, till I got this. That's why I left my 577 at home. Both men started laughing. Go ahead, Henry urged with a nod. Ray Johnson lifted the rifle and threw it to his shoulder. Balance is great, he said immediately. I only have 25 rounds for it, Henry admitted. Is that enough? Lord, I hope so. This isn't the only gun you brought, I trust? Henry smiled and shook his head. Look at that, Ray exclaimed when he saw the ammunition. It looked like something for a turn-of-the-century field piece. Got a 375% Ackley improved for the small stuff and a 500 Bummiller for elephant and buffalo, if I get tired of lugging this boat anchor around. Speaking of which, I'd like to make sure the scope on my 375 didn't change any in transit. Where can I set up some 200-yard targets? Ray lifted his eyebrows. In 15 years, Henry was only the second client he'd encountered who had wanted to check his sights before going afield. The first had been Max Collins. Don't you want to take a nap first? Your system must be thrown off some with the time change. Not right now. I'm still too keyed up about being here. Well, let me have Kineas get some lunch together for us, and then I'll show you where you can shoot your light rifle. Fresh salad, fresh tomatoes, fresh baked bread, and roasted guinea hen, all right? Sounds delicious. Kineas can grill you a steak if you'd prefer that. Maybe for dinner. Good. I'll have one of the boys. Find something you can use for a target, Ray offered. I brought targets. Ray Johnson raised his eyebrows. Have a feeling this is going to be a really good hunt, he thought with a smile. You didn't bring a shotgun, did you? Ray asked as they stopped under a tree beside the fire road 15 miles from camp. The sun was bright, and Ray recommended regular breaks to ingest fluids. They had parked the Land Rover and had been walking for about 2 hours. Henry had seen several zebra, which were not on his ticket, and almost 100 impala since leaving the vehicle. No, I don't shoot shotguns. Why? That's a pity. There's lots of good wing shooting in Africa, especially guinea fowl, like we had for lunch, he said, nodding towards some birds in the distance. Lot of them in this area. They're like small turkeys, 8-10 pounds. Take a lot of killing, though. Last client I had who brought a shotgun only had skeet loads with him. They'd have been okay for doves, but guinea fowl had just made 'em squawk and keep flying. Number 8s won't do it. You need 4s at least, he said as he took a drink from his canteen. Wouldn't the noise spook the other game? Henry asked as he watched the birds fly towards them. Ray laughed. Not Plains game. There's so much of it in this area you could detonate a bomb and you'd still find more a mile farther on. Henry thought about that and looked at the eyepiece of the loopholed variable on his. .375 Ackley Magnum. The scope was one of the new models in 1.5 to 5 power, with the dot reticle that Henry preferred. He noted with satisfaction that the power ring at the front of the eyepiece was set to the lowest power. Henry pulled a single earplug from the breast pocket of his khaki shirt and slipped it into his left ear. "Hold your ears," he said softly as he held his rifle at port arms and watched the 4 guinea fowl fly towards the trees that he and the others stood under. The lead bird was to the left of the 3 that followed it. 30 yards, maybe less, in a second. Dead on at 30, half-inch low at 20. Henry threw the infield action, 375 to his shoulder, and flicked the safety forward to disengage it. He squeezed the trigger a practiced amount, then increased the pressure when the dot in the center of the crosshairs was about 2 inches in front of the bird's head. As the muzzle blast rolled out over the Rhodesian plains and the gun rose in recoil, Henry Bowman slapped the bolt handle up into the rear, then shoved it forward and down as he pulled the rifle back on target. The rifle stock obscured his face, but he was smiling. The 3 other guinea fowl reacted simultaneously to the shot. 2 of them broke left, but one started to turn to Henry's right, spotted the 4 men under the trees, and wheeled left to join the other birds. Henry swung on this one and felt the trigger break just as the dot reticle passed through an imaginary spot 4 inches in front of and just slightly above the bird's beak. As the rubber recoil pad hammered his shoulder once again, Henry relaxed and watched the second corpse fall out of the sky. "Jesus!" Ray Johnson exclaimed. "Banda, grab those," he said unnecessarily. The head tracker was already jogging out to retrieve the dead birds. "I've certainly never had a client do that," Ray said to Henry, as he alternated his stares between the rifle in Henry's hands and the area out in the dry grass where the dead birds had fallen. "A 270 Nosier at 2,900 doesn't have the problem of insufficient power that skeet loads do," Henry said happily. "Probably blew the meat all to shit," Ray said in a tone that made it clear that he didn't care at all if each entire bird was now inedible. "We'll see," Henry shrugged. The tracker returned a few moments later with both guinea fowl and held them out for inspection. The professional hunter was stunned to see that the meat was not damaged at all. Using a bolt-action rifle that most people thought of as an elephant gun, Raymond Johnson's newest client had decapitated both birds in flight with 2 perfect headshots. "Exactly how is it you ended up a professional hunter over here anyway?" Henry asked as they sat at the dinner table and worked on their salads. "Didn't Uncle Max tell me you were originally a lawyer or something?" Ray smiled. "Yeah, I had a job in New York doing securities law 15 years ago. Lucked into an unusual personal injury case where the defendant was a big company about to be bought out by a conglomerate. We settled out of court for a bunch of money so it wouldn't queer the sale. I took some of the money from my cut and went on a safari in Kenya. While I was there, I got a cable that my dad had had a heart attack while driving with my mother, and they'd both been killed in the wreck. I finished up my hunt and then went home to settle the estate. I realized that I wasn't looking forward to going back and living in New York and poring over prospectuses. Guy I'd been with in Kenya had said there were some good opportunities in Angola and Mozambique for a guy who knew a bit about game. I settled things in the States and went to Angola. That's where I met your uncle." "Do you have any brothers or sisters?" Raymond shook his head. "No, only other family I had was my dad's brother, Uncle Carl. He and Dad both ran the ranch in Colorado." "Is it still there?" "Yeah, my uncle still runs it," Ray said, nodding his head. "I still own the half that belonged to my father. Dad had enough savings and insurance to pay the estate tax due at the time. That was in '63. I told Uncle Carl since he was going to have to hire more help, and I was fixed okay for money, he was welcome to all the profits so long as Dad's land stayed in my name. He knew I didn't have any urge to sell." "So you've got a bunch of land in Colorado to retire to if things go to shit over here, huh?" "That and a mutual fund I bought with my settlement money. Dollar cost averaged over 5 years and wrapped it in an annuity contract so it would grow tax deferred." Henry nodded in understanding and sipped his lemonade. "Whoever told you to do that was smart. Fed slammed the door on that one a few years back, but guys who were in already got grandfathered." Tony Kearns, my broker, was really good, Ray agreed. So, is it what you expected? He asked, changing the subject. Game plentiful enough? Henry had shot a good-sized impala at a little over 200 yards, and a nice wildebeest at about half that distance, but the professional hunter was still thinking of the flying birds he had seen his client kill that morning. Better than I ever imagined. I can't tell you what I was expecting exactly, but it wasn't this good, not by a jugful. He looked thoughtful for a moment, remembering how astonished he had been at regularly spotting elephant and rhino that afternoon. How many elephants did you say there were in Africa, Ray? Last estimate, about 1.25 million. That's what astonishes every one of my clients from the United States. Apparently there's some crazy rumor over there that because of all the hunting, African elephants are nearly extinct. A lot of people seem to think that, Henry admitted. Raymond laughed, then turned serious. No one likes to say it out loud, but it comes down to the simple question of which do you like better, African elephants or Africans? He took a bite of his salad and continued. That's why every country over here has game department people on the payroll whose job it is to go kill hundreds of elephants a year, whole herds of them, babies and all. I guess a lot of the American public flunked arithmetic. What do you mean? Well, a full-grown elephant eats about 400 pounds of vegetation a day. That means that per elephant, you need between 5 and 25 square miles of free grazing area, depending on the country and how good the soil is. That's just to sustain the animals at existing levels. Got a little problem there, though. It's called people. They have this nasty habit of wanting to own their own property and plant crops on it and raise cattle and stay alive. Those goals are not particularly compatible with having elephants and rhino and lions sharing the same real estate. You said in the summers you grew up on a place out in the country? Right. Cattle, chickens, pigs, corn, like that? All fenced in? Yeah. Your mother have a vegetable garden? Raymond asked. Of course. Any groundhogs ever get in it? This elicited a nod. So what'd you do? Shot M, Henry said. Right. Well, imagine that instead of weighing 10 pounds, those groundhogs you wanted to keep out of your fields weighed 10,000 pounds, and each one of them ate 400 pounds of your crops every day it was alive. Imagine instead of building a fence to keep the cattle and pigs in, you had to build one that would keep lions and leopards out, and also keep them away from where your children might happen to be. Good luck, he said with feeling. Any place here in Africa where the people want to grow crops, all the elephant and rhino have to be exterminated first. Any place people want to have beef or dairy cattle, or raise children for that matter, all the cats have to be killed off. Every last one of them. He smiled sadly. Like if you were in Florida. Send a dozen guys off into the swamp to kill as many alligators as they can. 10 years later, there'll be plenty of alligators in that swamp. But drain the swamp and pour concrete for a new A&P. There'll never be another gator there again. So there's a big push to divide up the government land for the residents? Henry asked. Ray Johnson nodded. With the trophy fees as high as they are, the raw land brings in enough money that the government can afford to leave huge sections of it alone. Continued profitable hunting businesses keep the land undeveloped, and that's good for photo safaris too. The photo people don't spend any money out here, but they do a lot for the tourism in the cities. One client I had brought his girlfriend on the hunt. She wanted to know why people couldn't just take pictures of the game and have no more hunting. I asked her if she'd be willing to pay $100 to the government for every picture she took of an impala, and $3,000 for every elephant, on top of paying for her transport over here and $400 a day for my services. She looked at me like I'd lost my fucking mind. The whole system usually goes to shit when they outlaw hunting. That's what we've seen in the other countries at least. Looks like it might happen to us with all this crap that's going on. He was referring to the civil war in Rhodesia that had been going on for several years. Do you think that will happen here? Henry asked. Don't know. A lot of people are leaving, mostly for South Africa. What I do will depend on if the government decides to outlaw hunting and kill off the game to make way for 100-acre farms. No read on that yet. Henry nodded. He took a drink of water and finished off his salad as Kinneas set a thick steak down in front of him. The talk soon returned to the events of the day's hunt and what was expected for the following morning. Political discussion was shelved for the time being, but the issues were ones Henry would ponder for the remainder of his trip. Major changes were in store for Rhodesia. The asset-based qualification for voting would be abolished, and full independence with majority rule, along with a name change for the country, would occur in 1980. As many had predicted, this event would immediately lead to a move towards a single-party government. 5 years after Henry's safari, Rhodesia's most productive citizens would have emigrated to South Africa. Hotels in the major cities, which had averaged 80% occupancy throughout the course of a year, would be down to 15% in the tourist season. The government would levy a 17% tariff on all retail sales in a fruitless effort to tax the country into prosperity. These events would force the new leaders to recognize that hunting was one of their country's few remaining assets capable of attracting foreign dollars. Hunting concessions would still be leased to those people willing to risk a business venture in an environment largely hostile to capitalism. The handwriting was on the wall, however, and by the time the country became a one-party state in 1988, Ray Johnson would be long gone. September 5th, 1978. "Let's watch them for a bit," Henry requested. "Sure. We'll glass them from here for a while, see if one of them's got a decent pair of teeth." Ray, Henry, the lead tracker, and 2 tracker skinners were looking across a canyon at 4 elephants on the other hillside, about a quarter-mile away. One of the bulls was pushing his head against a 12-diameter tree. Watch how he pushes and releases it, then pushes again, getting it rocking. He's going to get it moving farther and farther until he snaps it off at ground level. Henry watched, and just as Ray had predicted, in less than a minute the tree went all the way over, and a long cracking sound reached his ears a second later. "Why do they do that?" Henry asked. "No one knows. The explanation everyone uses is that the elephants do it to test their strength. They do it all the time, just look around at all the trees pushed over." Henry nodded. He was imagining a farmer trying to build something to keep elephants away from his crops. "A 2-foot thick poured concrete wall, maybe?" he thought with amusement. "See that third one from the left? His tusks are about as big as you're going to find, at least in this area. Look like 50, 55 aside from here. Want to finish that canteen, take a few pictures, and see if we can't swing around and approach them from downwind? Give your rada a workout." "Sounds good to me." Ray Johnson got his client to within 15 yards of the huge animal. He had advised Henry to avoid letting the elephant see his eyes. Henry didn't know if this was a superstition or if his eyes really could give him away, like the glint off the lenses of an enemy's binoculars. He kept them shielded with his free hand. Henry had told Ray he'd take a heart shot to see how well that would work using the huge 19th century rifle. Henry Bowman pulled the front trigger and held it down while drawing back the right hammer. He held the hammer to the rear as he released the trigger, then let go of the hammer spur as well. He didn't like to carry the 4-bore cocked and ready to fire, and hammer guns could be cocked in complete silence by using the method Henry had just employed. He glanced at Ray Johnson, nodded once, and threw the 25-pound rifle to his shoulder. The animal was standing broadside to Henry, facing to the young man's right. When the front sight bead covered the proper spot on the elephant's side, Henry Bowman gripped the gun's wrist and forward with all his strength, leaned forward, and squeezed the trigger. The tracker, standing 50 yards to the rear, near some eminently climbable trees, smiled involuntarily. The huge rifle made a sound like no other whenever it went off. Henry Bowman rocked backwards, brought the rifle down out of recoil, and thumbed back the hammer of the left barrel. He made no effort to do it silently this time. The elephant had taken 2 steps, stopped, and turned around so that Henry was now presented with its left side. "Did I miss the heart?" Henry wondered in amazement as he took aim again. The bull was standing still, and Henry saw a brown spot of dirt or other discoloration on the animal's skin in the proper area for another heart shot. When the front sight bead obscured it, Henry pulled the Rada's rear trigger. He was again rocked back under recoil, only this time Henry let go of the wrist of the stock, grabbed the knob of the underlever, and swung the lever to the side as he brought the gun down across his left knee, breaking it open. He could tell with his peripheral vision that the elephant was still standing. Can't be flinching that badly, he thought for an instant, then closed his mind to all but the task at hand. Without looking up, Henry plucked the 2 empty cases from the barrels, dropped them at his feet, and pulled a pair of cartridges out of a surgical elastic carrier he wore on his left forearm. He slid them into the chambers, swung the barrels shut, closed the underlever, cocked the right hammer, and threw the rifle to his shoulder just in time to see the bull elephant fall over on his side, dead. Henry glanced at Raymond, who was holding his. 458 in one hand at his side, grinning. He pulled the right hammer back, held back the front trigger, and let the hammer down gently. He could feel the blood pumping in his ears as he walked over and stood by the huge head of the dead creature. Henry laid his hand on the thick hide just over the eye. He felt a much stronger emotion now than he ever felt after shooting any other game animal. Ray and the men recognized this. They had seen it before. The 4 of them stood silently and kept a respectful distance. "I don't know what happened," Henry said finally. "What do you mean?" "I must have missed with the first shot a vital organ. I mean, not the whole elephant. He didn't go down. He went down faster than I've ever seen with a heart shot. They usually walk 100 yards or so before they fall down." "What? Elephant's heart's bigger than a basketball," Ray said as he walked toward the dead bull. "Put a little pencil-sized hole in it, you'll kill the animal, but not instantly. You were talking about the Guinness Book. Remember that huge bull shot in Angola in '55 that's mounted in the Smithsonian?" "Yeah. That one took 3 full magazines from A416 Rigby. You don't think 11 of those shots were all in non-vital—" "Hey, look!" Raymond was pointing to the dead animal's hide. 2 1-inch holes overlapped, with the right one more ragged than the left. "My God, that's an exit wound!" Henry exclaimed, suddenly realizing that his first shot had penetrated 6 feet of elephant, torn through the inch-thick hide on the far side, and then sailed off over the bush. "I thought it was a spot of dirt. I used it for an aiming point." "With some success," the professional hunter said dryly. Ray smiled to himself. Henry was staring at the hole in the hide and thinking about his 19th century rifle's amazing penetration. Every other client he'd ever had would be examining the ivory, trying to estimate its weight. "Damn, do you think the second shot also went through?" Henry asked, mostly to himself. "Want to help the Skinners check?" Ray asked, joking. "Yes! Better take your shoes off and roll up your pants then." Half an hour later, Henry Bowman was knee-deep in elephant entrails. He found the elephant's heart and saw how it was indeed larger than a basketball. The organ had sustained massive trauma from the 2 4-bore slugs that had torn through its center from opposite sides. Henry tracked the path of the second bullet, poking through the vast quantity of elephant guts to determine exactly where it had gone. He found that after the slug had passed through the heart, it had clipped a rib on the offside. He pushed his finger through the jagged break in the bone, through the flesh on the side until he found the inside of the hide. There was a hole in it, and when Henry pushed his finger through it, he touched the hard surface of rock. "I'm all the way through to the ground," Henry announced. Second shot went clear through, too. He stood up and began to wipe his arms and legs off with a rag that one of the Skinners handed him. "Don't you want to finish butchering him?" Raymond asked in amusement. "No, I'm just a typical lazy client." Ray Johnson translated the comment into Swahili for the Skinners, and they all started laughing. September 7th, 1978. Ray Johnson opened his mouth to speak, then thought better of it. Henry can decide whether to shoot or not, he thought. Henry Bowman had walked on ahead 15 yards as they had climbed the hill, and was now silently cocking the right hammer of his 4-bore Rada. Ray motioned the trackers to stay put and crouched down before moving to join his client. On the other side of the small rise were 3 buffalo bulls. All were large, but the nearest one was exceptional. Ray judged it to be about 1,800 pounds. It was broadside to them, at a distance of less than 25 yards. Henry swung the rifle to his shoulder, and the right barrel thundered. At the sound, the other 2 bulls ran away and to the left, up a slight incline. The buffalo Henry had shot ran with considerable effort to the right. By the time Henry had pulled the big rifle out of recoil and cocked the left hammer, the animal was 40 yards away. "I saw your shot. You went right through the lungs. You don't need—" Ray's advice was cut off by the tremendous muzzle blast of the left barrel of Henry's rifle. Damn, but that's a cannon, Ray thought. The buffalo did a somersault and landed on its back, dead. You didn't need that second shot, Raymond reproached his client. He wouldn't have lasted 100 yards. What, are you trying to lower my ammo costs on this hunt? Henry asked. I'm tired of shooting these game animals in the right spot with the largest rifle ever made, and then having to wait for them to get the message that they're dead. It's very unnerving. Where was that second shot? I couldn't tell. Right hip. Probably got enough penetration to get into the lungs, too. The rata once again exceeded expectations. When the crew got to the Big Cape buffalo and examined it, they discovered that the first shot had gone in the right side, straight through the center of the lungs and out the left side, leaving a 1-inch exit hole after traversing almost 4 feet of flesh. The second shot, as the bull was quartering away, had been even more impressive. It smashed the buffalo's right hip and continued forward, ripping a path through the heart and finally coming to rest under the hide in front of the bull's shoulder. The 4 1/2-ounce slug from the 100-year-old rifle had pulverized a massive bone and then gone on through 5 feet of muscle. All 5 of the men were very impressed when they saw what the old gun had done, and they took several photos to document the event. Well, Henry said as he and Ray watched the trackers gut the animal in preparation for winching it onto the Land Rover, I hate to be a wimp, but it's been a week now, and I'm getting a little tired of lugging this boat anchor around. You're going to stop using the 4-bore? Ray asked in mock horror. In truth, he had been very impressed that Henry had carried it almost all day, every day, relinquishing it for his. 375 only when Plains game was immediately present. Have one of the trackers carry it for you, he suggested. No, I like having my main gun in my hands, and I wouldn't wish a 25-pound gun on anyone who didn't get to shoot it at game. He looked down at his big rifle and grinned. I've shot 2 elephant and 2 buffalo with it so far. That'll do for now. I'm going to start carrying my 500 Bum Miller at least for a few days. 12-pound gun's going to feel like a feather. In 2 days, Henry was going to be glad he had made the decision to switch rifles. September 9th, 1978. Henry! Ray Johnson screamed. In the truck! Now! He stepped on the starter and stabbed the throttle, revving the engine. They had been looking for a big elephant all that morning. It was lunchtime and very hot. The Land Rover had no doors, windshield, or roof, and Ray Johnson had parked the open vehicle under some trees at the side of a dried-up creek bed. In the shade, he had broken out the canteens and some sandwiches for Henry and the 3 trackers. Banda, the lead tracker, had walked about 150 yards away on the other side of the creek bed, looking for tracks and any other sign of a good-sized elephant. Henry, who liked the Rhodesian countryside, had walked in the same general direction as Banda had, and was about 100 yards away from the vehicle when Ray heard the familiar sound and began yelling to his client. Banda had heard the sound a few moments before, and he was grinning broadly. He loved showing his courage and speed in front of the other trackers. Henry looked back quizzically at the professional hunter. Ray was standing on the seat of the Land Rover, gesticulating wildly towards Banda and screaming something that Henry could not understand at that distance. The other 2 trackers stood in the back of the open vehicle, waving their arms frantically as well. That was when Henry Bowman heard the noise. It didn't register at first, but it grew quickly, and in a few seconds Henry realized what Ray was yelling about. He saw that Banda was standing motionless, as if rooted to his spot. About 100 yards past the head tracker, some 200 head of Cape buffalo were coming into view around the side of a hill. They were running directly towards Banda, Henry, and the vehicle. Henry Bowman looked over his shoulder, judging the distance to the vehicle, then brought his eyes back to the lead tracker. Why doesn't he move? There's no trees around. He's going to get trampled in the stampede or whatever you call it. Henry searched frantically for an escape route for Banda, but saw none. He realized that if he waited a few seconds more, he himself would not be able to make it back to the Land Rover, and Banda's another 50 yards closer to the stampeding herd. He's already fucked. Henry Bowman made a decision. Raymond Johnson and the 2 tracker skinners stood in the idling Land Rover and watched in abject horror as Henry Bowman unslung his 500 Bum Miller from his shoulder and began running directly towards the stampede. Banda licked his lips and decided he had let the thundering herd get close enough. He turned on his heel and began to sprint for the truck, only to see Henry 10 yards away, running straight towards him. Banda's eyes grew wide with terror. He knew the American could never outrun the herd. Henry Bowman misinterpreted the tracker's look of fear. About time you figured out you were going to get stomped. I thought you guys weren't supposed to choke like that, he thought as he brought himself to a halt. Henry went into the speed shooting stance he used for rifles of heavy recoil, with almost all of his weight on his forward left foot. "Right behind me!" he screamed to the tracker, hoping he both heard and understood. Henry flicked off the safety and swung the muzzle of the custom Enfield up and into line with the approaching herd, which was now about 20 yards away. 15 feet, Uncle Mac said. I hope this works, Henry thought briefly, then focused his mind on what he had to do. Time seemed to slow down for Henry Bowman as he identified the one buffalo that was coming exactly straight at him. It was a medium-sized cow, and when it was a little less than 20 feet away, Henry squeezed the trigger. The first 600 grain barn solid out of the necked up, 460 Weatherby case struck within a quarter of an inch of where Henry had been aiming, instantly shutting off all the buffalo's brain function before blasting out the back of its skull and then re-entering the animal's body just in front of the base of the spine. The dead animal's head slammed into the dirt about 8 feet in front of Henry Bowman, and the carcass began to tumble. As the hindquarters of the tumbling animal briefly obscured his vision, Henry worked the Enfield's bolt. A bull had been following 2 steps behind the buffalo cow and was now trying to jump over its dead body. Henry brought the rifle to bear on the chest of the second buffalo, slapped the trigger, and threw himself forward as the bullet tore straight through the bull's chest and shattered its spine. The buffalo died in mid-jump and collapsed on the neck of the dead cow, tearing his hide on one of the cow's horns. Henry braced his left knee on the dead cow's back as he worked the bolt. Another bull was almost to the 2 dead buffalo and looked as if he might or might not break right. Henry ignored the animals that were streaming around the obstacle he had created, focused on the one headed straight at him, then slapped the trigger again. By now he was holding the rifle lightly, as he would a.22, and firing it as soon as the butt touched his shoulder. The gun hammered him with over 100 foot-pounds of recoil, but Henry didn't feel it. His third shot hit just to the left of the bull's right eye. The bullet blew much of the bull's brain matter out of a jagged hole at the left rear of his head, just below the horn boss. Momentum carried the dead bull forward, and it crashed on top of the bodies of the first 2. Henry had fired all 3 shots in less than 3 seconds. Henry stood crouched behind the 3 buffalo pile with his left knee on the nearest animal and his rifle at the ready, prepared to either duck down or fire his remaining 2 shots. The charging animals passed on both sides of Henry and the 3 buffalo he had killed, like water flowing around a boulder sitting in the middle of a stream. It seemed to take a very long time, but in fact the process took less than 15 seconds. After the last of over 200 animals had passed the obstruction he had created, an adrenaline filled Henry Bowman stood up and turned around to look for the lead tracker. He half expected to see Banda's body lying trampled and lifeless 5 or 10 yards away. Instead, he saw nothing but hoof prints in the dry dirt. The air was filled with dust, but as it settled, Henry could still see no sign of the lean native. Henry opened the bolt of the Enfield, replenished its magazine with 3 cartridges from the S.D. Myers leather carrier he wore on his belt, and engaged the safety. He stared around the immediate area, searching for the man. He must have gotten farther than I thought, Henry said to himself as he widened the scope of his visual search. There was a 4th buffalo carcass lying 50 yards away. Looks like at least 1 round exited. Later investigation would reveal that it was Henry's 3rd shot which had struck this animal, a cow, in the lungs after exiting the skull of the second bull Henry had killed. Henry Bowman suddenly realized his legs were quivering. He sat down on the carcass of the first buffalo he had killed and waited for his heart rate to return to normal. That was when he heard the sound of the Land Rover's engine approaching. Ray Johnson could scarcely believe what he was seeing as he drove past the carcass of the dead cow. A massive jumble of dead buffalo was up ahead, and Henry Bowman was sitting on one of them, waiting to be picked up. He was actually smiling. "Did I pick out the 4 biggest ones, Ray?" Henry asked with an unsuccessful attempt at a poker face when the vehicle pulled up alongside. Ray was driving, and Bonda and the other 2 trackers were in the back. "What the hell did you think you were doing?" his guide demanded. Henry looked sheepish. "I guess Bonda can run faster than I thought," Henry Bowman said as he stood up. He stared at the 4 dead buffalo, the smallest of which weighed 1,500 pounds, and shook his head. "You need a bigger truck, Ray. We'll never get all 4 of these in the back of that thing." Cape buffalo taken with shoulder shot from Henry Bowman's RB Rada 4-bore Over entrance hole are 4-bore cartridge, fired case, and cartridges for 500 Bum Miller and 375 Ackley. December 21st, 1978. Cindy Caswell was building a snowman in the backyard. Helping her were two 9-year-old twin brothers whose father had just been transferred to nearby Fort Leonard Wood. The boys were new to the neighborhood. Cindy always seemed to get along well with boys, especially ones that were a little older, unlike some of the other 7- and 8-year-old girls in her grade school class. "God damn it, that goddamn kid's pissed on the couch again," Boone Caswell yelled as he jumped up from where he'd just sat down. He ran through the kitchen and out the back door. Cindy heard him coming and cringed. "Please don't let him say anything," Cindy prayed. It was bad enough to have her father discipline her in front of her peers, without having them know exactly why he was so angry. Caswell grabbed his daughter by the arm and dragged her towards the house. Boone Caswell's head still hurt from the previous evening's excesses, and at 10:30 on a Friday morning he had intended to see what was on television. There wasn't any work to be had around the holidays, at least none that Caswell was willing to do. "Fucking brat!" he screamed as he dragged his daughter in front of the couch. "How old you gonna get before you quit doing this?" He slapped Cindy hard across the face, then grabbed her by the hair and shoved her face down into the soiled cushion. "You like that smell?" he demanded. "That what you want the whole house to smell like, huh?" Caswell held his daughter's head in that position for about 10 seconds. Cindy held her breath and remained motionless. She had learned from experience that whenever she resisted, the punishment increased. Tears welled up in Cindy Caswell's eyes. "Wish he had punched me in the stomach instead of the face. Christmas is only 5 days away." There were several family gatherings, and the marks would definitely show. Mom can use some of her makeup again, she told herself. No one will know, but she knew that everyone would. The two newcomers to the neighborhood could hear the man yelling inside the house. His words were muffled, but there was no mistaking his rage. They ran out of the Caswells' backyard and down the street. They had just learned what everyone in their new school would tell them as soon as the second semester started. Don't ever go over to Cindy Caswell's house. Her dad's meaner than a snake and half crazy. That's why both her sisters live with relatives, not at home. February 17th, 1982. The so-called leaders in the White House have an agenda that can be summed up in one sentence: enact spending cuts to abandon the Americans who most need our help, and precipitate a world war with a massive arms buildup. Fellow members of Congress, this is unconscionable. We must fight to ensure that our less fortunate citizens are not forced to starve to death because of callous disregard from some of our elected officials under the false promise of tax reform. We must safeguard our workers from the unfeeling devastation wreaked by the invisible hand the White House so unashamedly admires. We must stop provoking the leaders of the Soviet Union with name-calling and blatant aggression in the form of weapons buildup. These policies can only lead to a nuclear holocaust. Richard Gaines stopped to take a breath. His aides had advised him against the use of the word Holocaust, but he went with it anyway. It is time that we accept our role as keepers of the public trust and enact legislation that meets human needs. For this reason, I am introducing House Bill Number. Congressman Gaines went on to explain the piece of legislation he had crafted to reverse the lower tax, free market, strong defense philosophy which President Reagan perpetually championed. Gaines' bill mandated additional outlays for government entitlement programs and expanded welfare state, tariffs, and other protectionist trade restrictions, and increased federal control over the American public. Every member of Congress who heard him describe it knew that Gaines also had higher taxes in mind, although he could not put that in the bill. Democrats held a clear majority in Congress, and most of the members of that august body would actually have liked Dick Gaines' bill to become law. The president's philosophy of self-determination held strong sway over the American public, however. Most members of Congress were loath to support a blatantly tax and spend measure in the current political climate. Gaines' proposal and others like it went nowhere. The problem would be made doubly vexing to the congressmen by what soon began to happen around the globe. The results of low tax, free market policies, and a strong military were very discomforting to Richard Gaines and those who shared his beliefs. In the ensuing 6 years, the United States saw its own gross national product rise by an amount equal to the entire economy of Germany, the wealthiest nation in Europe. It was the largest peacetime expansion in living memory. The U.S. stock market tripled in value, the U.S. dollar showed record strength, and U.S. inflation fell to a 20% year low. The Berlin Wall was torn down, the Soviet Union collapsed, and socialist regimes in country after country toppled and were replaced by ones which embraced many of the free market principles which America had demonstrated. Richard Gaines and legislators with similar priorities had to wait until 1988 before they had a president to work with who was amenable to the idea of higher taxes, bigger government, and reduced individual freedom. The congressmen's jobs were secure, however. Federal regulations gave congressional incumbents a tremendous advantage in the polls, so Richard Gaines and his friends in the House all collected substantial paychecks while they waited. April 10th, 1982. Hey, the gang's all here. Anything interesting arrived lately in the used section, Stoke? Henry Bowman had just walked into Kelly's Sporting Goods, seen that several of his friends were there, and hailed the store's resident gunsmith and double rifle expert. Stokely Meyer had many qualities that endeared him to Henry, three of which were that he had been to Africa, liked big rifles, and was the most creative swearer Henry had ever known. Only little stuff, 33/8 and smaller, not even a decent medium bore in the rack. The tea-baggers that come in here tend to be a bit recoil-sensitive, shall we say, Stokely explained, with an exaggerated stiff-upper-lip British accent. A muscular man with a mustache who was standing at the end of the pistol case laughed. Rufus Ingram was one of the few Americans who had served in Britain's Special Air Service, which was considered by many to be the finest of the world's Special Forces units. He was standing next to Thomas J. Fleming. Henry walked over to greet his friends. "Hey, Rufus, Tom. No Shanghai Municipal Police guns here either?" Henry asked, looking down in the pistol display case. Rufus Ingram collected handguns that had been used by the famous department, which were marked with the Shanghai crest. "Not today. Got another safari planned anytime soon?" "I wish. I did get a letter from the guy I hunted with, Ray Johnson, not too long ago. He's planning on moving to South Africa. As far as the economy goes, I gather that things have really gone to hell in Rhodesia. He said in his letter they have a 17% national sales tax now." "I hope he doesn't have much money there," Tom Fleming said. The new government in Zimbabwe prohibited its citizens from taking their money out of the country, which made its residents all the more eager to do so. "No, Ray's no fool. When I paid him for my trip, I wired most of the money to an account in Luxembourg. I think he only keeps enough around to meet expenses. Probably sell off the Land Rovers to cover the last bills right before he cuts out." "Speaking of Rhodesia," Rufus said, "a Rhodesian friend of ours, Earl Taylor Edgerton, is coming to town in a few weeks to help us teach a class." "Class? What kind?" Henry asked. "Executive protection and anti-terrorist measures," Rufus explained. "I handle protection strategy, and Tom covers carry methods and legal issues. Earl's the explosives expert. It's on the weekend of the 27th. You ought to come. We'll get you a pass." "I'm free." "Good. I think you'll find Earl's presentation very interesting." Rufus and Tom shared a look. Henry said nothing. He knew he would find out sooner or later why they were grinning at each other. "Earl has had some interesting experiences," Tom explained. "He was born in Rhodesia, and he was on the losing side during the recent overthrow. He's wanted in Zimbabwe for murder, violating whatever they call the Neutrality Act, and a few other things in conjunction with the war. He can't go back there." "He hates socialist governments," Rufus added. Tom Fleming chuckled. "Zimbabwe government still sends him his pension, though. They have to. It was part of the UN agreement for them to recognize the new regime." Tom Fleming looked at the book in his hand. "And speaking of governments, have you seen a copy of this yet?" Fleming held the soft-bound book out for his friend. "What is it?" Henry took the 6x9 booklet from the lawyer and looked at the cover. "The Right to Keep and Bear Arms. Report of the Subcommittee on the Constitution of the Committee on the Judiciary, United States Senate, 97th Congress, Second Session. February 1982, printed for the use of the Committee on the Judiciary. The results of using the entire research facilities of the Library of Congress to determine the original basis of the Second Amendment to the Constitution," Fleming explained. "The work of some of the best constitutional scholars in the country. the findings of the 79 and 80 Treasury hearings on ATF practices. Also some position statements from some of the national anti-human rights organizations. For comic relief, I guess, he added. No, I haven't seen it. For sale by the Superintendent of Documents, U.S. Government Printing Office, huh? Henry said as he read what was printed inside the cover of the 175-page book. Guess again, Tom Fleming said with a sardonic smile. They're already out of stock, and get this, they aren't going to print anymore. Think maybe someone on the committee doesn't want the public reading the results of their research? Look at the list of committee members on the next page. Boy, there are some career slime buckets here, aren't there? Henry agreed when he saw the list of names. Then he started thumbing through the contents of the government report. He stopped abruptly on page 20, and his eyes got bigger. They admit those Treasury assholes are out of control, Henry said in astonishment. He started reading aloud from the section on the Treasury hearings that were held 2 and 3 years earlier. At these hearings, evidence was received from experts who had studied the BATF and from officials of the Bureau itself. Based upon these hearings, it is apparent that enforcement tactics made possible by current federal firearms laws are constitutionally, legally, and practically reprehensible. Well, that has a nice ring to it, Henry said. He scanned more of the chapter. Persons Bureau's own figures demonstrate that percentage of arrests devoted to felons in possession and knowingly selling to them down to 10% of their cases. Christ, I didn't know it was that low. BATF has primarily devoted its firearms enforcement efforts to the apprehension of individuals who lack all criminal intent and knowledge, repeatedly entice gun collectors into making a small number of sales, then charge them with engaging in the business of dealing in guns without the required license. Law permits a felony conviction where individual has no criminal knowledge or intent. Numerous collectors have been ruined by a felony record. Henry looked up. Which is why I have had an FFL since I can remember. He returned to the document. Hey, they even admit that, even in cases where prosecutors failed to file criminal charges, agents of the Bureau have generally confiscated the entire collection of the potential defendant upon the ground that he intended to use it in that violation of the law. Well, there went the Fifth Amendment, Henry added. Jesus, he said as he read on. Here they document them confiscating a $7,000 shotgun. Probably some pommy dick smoker's Purdy, Stokely Meyer threw out. He could not imagine anyone paying that much money for a gun with no rifling in its bore. Henry thumbed through the section, searching for something. I don't see anything in here about them turning Ken Ballou into a vegetable, he said. Then he had a thought. Hey, what happened to that Maryland cop they suckered into going along? The guy that put his round right between Ballou's eyes when 9 feds missed him completely from 10 feet? You mean Chiamillo? Ballou's family hit him with a civil suit. $2 million, I think. Feds said they'd stick up for him, but when he got to the courtroom and started looking around, he was all by his lonesome. That's one of the worst things about that department. They have just about zero loyalty downwards along the chain of command. They'll hang their guys out in the wind in a minute, and that makes for zero loyalty up the chain. I talked to Lou last year, Rufus Ingram added. I think if you took every ATF agent and wired them for sound with GI Field telephones, it'd be fine with him. For some reason, Henry Bowman paused and thought about Tom Fleming's words for several moments, and took the time to reflect on them. No loyalty up the chain of command, huh? Ought to be able to do something with that someday, he decided. That thought would stick in his mind thereafter, surfacing periodically over the next decade. Henry continued to scan the government report and soon found another item of interest. It says reform is needed right now, and some bill S-1030 will do it. Doesn't give the exact words, but looks like the gist of it is no such thing as a nonviolent gun crime. That bill's DOA, Tom Fleming said with a sneer. Yeah, can't see that happening. Henry Bowman looked at the table of contents, checked a few pages, then looked again at the book's cover. So our government assigned a committee to research the Second Amendment. They find out it means exactly what we've said all along. They admit their lawyers lied in the Miller case. They admit the adversarial process was absent there. He flipped some pages. Jesus! On page 32, they even quote the National Coalition to Ban Handguns, saying that the Supreme Court has ruled that the right to keep and bear arms exists independently of the Second Amendment, meaning the Bill of Rights is a reminder to the government, not authorization. He thumbed further. They've got great case law in here. Here's a state decision from 1878. If cowardly and dishonorable men sometimes shoot unarmed men with army pistols or guns, the evil must be prevented by the penitentiary and gallows, and not by a general deprivation of constitutional privilege. The more things change, the more they stay the same, Tom Fleming commented. We needed that peckerneck on the Supreme Court in 34, Stokely Meyer said. Henry looked at his three friends. So, they did all this research. Tom, what's going to be the upshot of it? Upshot? Nothing. Absolutely nothing. It's the fox guarding the henhouse. If anyone like us reads it, it just tells us what we already know. It makes us feel good for 5 minutes. If Senator Arnold Katzenbaum reads it, he'll toss the whole thing in the trash after the first paragraph and sponsor another ban. Fleming grinned as he thought of something. I wonder if his son-in-law, the kid that has the chain of strip mall law offices, I wonder how he did on constitutional law in school and what he thinks of his wife's father. Fleming shook his head and returned to the subject. Anyway, any reform bill that actually gets taken seriously, somebody will probably hang some horrible amendment on it, and the sponsors will agree to the compromise and throw another baby out of the sleigh. Tom Fleming pointed to the government document in Henry's hand. What they're talking about in there is just going to get worse. He shrugged. But take it home and read it anyway. I got it for you. Tom Fleming's prediction about a reform bill was exactly right, as the country would discover in 4 years. His comment about the situation getting worse also proved to be a bullseye. April 24th, 1982. Sit over there. If anyone asks, you're one of the small arms instructors, Rufus told Henry. Henry took a seat about halfway back and pulled a sheet from his pocket, listing the instructor's curriculum vitae and the morning's agenda. Protection against terrorism. Drawing on experienced experts, the staff of DRC services have put together lectures and field exercises to prepare governmental, military, or private security protective teams to guard their principals against kidnap or assassination. Due to the international commitments of the instructional staff, it has taken years to bring them together in the USA to offer this opportunity. The instructional team. Dean Copeland has spent 15 years with the Detroit Police Department, serving as a homicide sergeant and as the weapons and tactics instructor for the Special Response Team. Dean's articles on ammunition, weapons, and tactics have made him well known as an expert on deadly encounters. Brian Rowan is the founder of the Surrey-based DRC Services, which provides and trains bodyguards worldwide. Among Brian's assignments has been heading up protection details for the Miss World pageant. Brian is an expert at both unarmed and armed close combat techniques. Thomas J. Fleming served as a U.S. Army infantry officer and later as an officer commanding a CID unit. An attorney and an acknowledged expert on training military and police in close combat with firearms, Tom is the author of The Well-Trained Gunfighter and Deep Cover Terrorist. Tom's articles have also appeared regularly in Guns Review, Law Enforcement Monthly, and other respected publications. Earl Taylor Edgerton served in the Rhodesian Light Infantry, Rhodesian SAS, Tracker Combat Unit, and as the training officer for the Sella Scouts. Later he served as an officer in South Africa's 5th Recce Commando. A veteran of a decade of counter-terrorist warfare, Earl has now emigrated to the USA and brings much expertise on explosives, demolition, bombs, incendiaries, and close combat to this course. Rufus Ingram was an officer with the USAF Combat Security Police and later served with the SAS on very important person protection units in Europe and the Third World. He trains anti-terrorist units in this country and others. His book's Dead Clients Give Lousy Referrals and Executives Don't Eat at Donut Shops have become standard works on close protection and anti-terrorism. Humpy Atkinson spent 26 years with 22nd SAS Regiment fighting in Borneo, Aden, and was an SAS Sabre Squadron Sergeant Major during the Dhofar War. Later, he was the senior NCO in SAS Ops Research, ran the SAS Combat Survival Course, and ran 22nd SAS Training Wing. Humpy was on the original SAS Bodyguard training team and helped form the SAS Anti-Terrorist Unit. His book Save Your Butt No Matter What is an outstanding text on survival anywhere in the world. Henry Bowman turned the sheet over and saw that the morning's lecture was to be given by the fourth man on the list, Earl Taylor Edgerton. Soon a muscular man of medium height and curly blonde hair walked into the room and stepped behind the podium. In a few seconds the room was quiet and the man smiled at the people in the class. "Good morning," he said in the clipped British accent of native Rhodesians. "I'm Earl Taylor Edgerton. The last two have a hyphen between, so either call me Earl or use all three, but don't dump the middle one." The audience smiled. "I've been brought on to discuss the proper use of high explosives, how to improvise when the good stuff isn't available, what to do when it is, and most importantly, the proper construction, use, and handling of detonators. Even if your interest lies solely in recognizing terrorist threats and not in actually blowing something up, learning how to do it yourself gives the best background for finding charges that have been set. First, I'll talk about explosive types, where they are usually set, and how they are typically detonated. Then, I want to take a bit more time on the subject of the detonators themselves, for they are the brains, you might say, of explosive weapons." Earl Taylor Edgerton rubbed his hands together and nodded. "Right then, first up on the list of products to use is what we call ANFO." Earl wrote the letters on the chalkboard and turned back to the students. "This acronym stands for ammonium nitrate fuel oil. Anyone here who has never mixed up a bit of this and tried it out has led a very sheltered life indeed." He turned back to the board and wrote the figure 507 underneath the four letters. "If you are mixing up your own batch, 5.7% fuel oil by weight is the proper amount to give a chemically balanced mixture for best combustion, much like the fuel-air mixture on a properly tuned carburetor." Henry Bowman glanced at the other attendees and saw that they were taking detailed notes of the man's lecture. "Now comes the part about too much oil being better than too little," Henry mentally predicted. "Either that or how hardware store fertilizer is almost as good as commercial blasting agents, but the powder companies don't want you to know that. Though the 5.7 figure is ideal, a bit more diesel fuel results in only a slight degradation in performance. Too little, however, reduces the force of the explosion substantially. The mixture and performance curves are provided in the handout I've given each of you." Henry saw many of the students leaf through their papers to find the chart. "The next consideration is the source of the ammonium nitrate. The companies which manufacture the material for blasting use will give you all sorts of reasons why you must purchase their product, and woe betide anyone so foolish as to expect decent results using ordinary ammonium nitrate fertilizer." He gave a wolfish grin. "While it is true that the blasting grades absorb the diesel fuel a bit more thoroughly and may be a bit more efficient, thousands upon thousands of things have been blown up quite nicely using the hardware store product, which is much easier to get and raises no eyebrows." All of these facts were common knowledge to Henry Bowman. He had mixed up his first batch of ANFO at age 13 and detonated it in a hole made by a post-hole digger. Now, as a contract geologist often working for petroleum companies, blasting agents were a fact of life. Earl Taylor Edgerton's accent got Henry thinking about British things, which instantly got him daydreaming about large British double rifles such as his 4-bore, and soon he was thinking about Colonel Fosbury's collapsing bullet. This was a 19th century invention for large bore rifles where a hollow slug was filled with a 2-ingredient explosive mixture and solid base swaged onto it. It detonated on impact with heavy bone, or after about 18 inches of penetration. Henry was doodling sketches of Fosbury's collapsing bullet in his notebook when he caught a few key words that told him Earl Taylor Edgerton was now talking about military plastic explosives. Henry started to pay more attention, for this was a subject he knew little about. He was still thinking about exploding bullets for his Rada 4-bore, though, and was not listening as closely as he might have been, at least not at first. Common problem when using plastics and other high-grade agents for the first time is overestimating the amount required for the desired results. When I killed the president of Zambia, it was with a buried charge of 200 pounds of Semtex concealed underneath the asphalt. I should say that the buried charge is one of the simplest delivery systems and an excellent one provided that the target's route is known in advance. Earl pronounced it advance. Henry was jerked out of his daydream. Did he just say he killed the president of Zambia? Henry thought in astonishment. In this country, of course, the lecturer continued, such a plan would be most fruitless. The president's planned route is a closely guarded secret, and the Secret Service checks every inch of it with metal detectors and other devices prior to his passage along it. However, in third world countries, or for all U.S. officials of lesser concern than the immediate occupants of the White House, this is an excellent method of dispatch. Therefore, if you are assigned to keep some cannibal alive, you should take a leaf from the Secret Service boy's book and thoroughly examine the route prior to commencing travel. We will discuss the details of that process. He pronounced it with a long O this afternoon. Earl Taylor Edgerton looked baffled for a moment. Where was I before I ran off about buried charges? Earl Taylor Edgerton asked himself. Ah, yes, quantity. As I was saying, when I killed the president of Zambia, I used 200 pounds of Semtex buried beneath the roadway. I have no excuse for what I did. I was used to using lower grade, more universally available materials, and I did not alter my weight estimates whatsoever. The force of that explosion blew the president's car and his entourage's car over 300 yards, which was entirely excessive and could have had tragic results. Fortunately, the flying debris did not land on any of our people. 200 pounds of Semtex was entirely too much. In contrast, I used a mere half-pound charge on the leader of the Swapo party. By fixing the 8-ounce block of Semtex to the gasoline tank of the Audi Fox that he was driving, he pronounced it Fox, which Henry thought appropriate, I accomplished the same result with far less disruption. The gasoline tank is an excellent spot for placement, and one of the first places you should look if you are assigned protective duty. Should you be working the other side, a half-pound is sufficient for a lightweight vehicle such as the Fox, but a pound should be used in the case of a full-size American auto and perhaps 2 pounds for a limousine or large truck. Henry Bowman glanced around the room and saw that everyone was rapidly taking notes. He looked at what the man in front of him had written. Don't use too much Semtex. Gasoline tank is good spot 1/2 lb for small cars, 1 lb for Impala station wagons, 2 pounds. Limos and trucks. Tom and Rufus weren't kidding when they said MS would be an interesting seminar, Henry thought. Gotta talk to this guy at lunch, February 28, 1985. I don't like what I've been hearing, babe. I don't either, Randy. Maybe it's time you went to the courthouse and filed this, like we were talking about doing. Yeah. Can you watch the girls? I'll take Sammy with me. Of course. Can you pick up some milk when you're in town? We're about out. Sure, he said, kissing his wife before he left the cabin. Randy and Vicky Weaver were in their mid-30s. They had left Iowa 2 years before and moved with their 3 children to the mountains in Idaho. Outside Fort Dodge, Iowa, Randy had been a John Deere mechanic who supplemented the family income with an Amway distributorship. He and Vicky had been raised Baptist and went to church regularly, but they disagreed with most ministers' interpretation of Scripture and had gone from one church to another in search of a spiritual philosophy that matched their own. Ultimately, Randy and Vicky aligned themselves with a sect known as Christian Identity, a group whose theology included the belief that European whites are God's chosen people. The Weavers, like many members of Christian Identity and like many residents of Idaho, had no great affection for blacks, Jews, or big government. This was one of the reasons Randy and Vicky had moved to the Selkirk Mountains in the Idaho wilderness area and loved living there. Because of the remote location, Vicky Weaver homeschooled the 3 Weaver children. An Aryan Nations camp was located a few miles from the Weavers' home. Randy had attended 2 of their meetings and had decided that he did not want to join their group. The homeschooling, the nearby white supremacy camp, and the fact that the Weavers, like almost everyone in Idaho, owned guns was a combination that elicited comment from a few of the other residents in the area. As local gossip had it, Randy was a member of Aryan Nations, owned illegal weapons, and federal agents were going to conduct an armed raid on his home. It was something that Randy Weaver wanted to avoid. After Weaver kissed his wife goodbye, he started the drive to the Boundary County Courthouse. He was going to file an affidavit putting on record the fact that he and Vicky believed that their lives and those of their 3 children were in danger from what Randy termed a smear campaign by some of the local residents. The affidavit listed the residents Randy and Vicky felt were causing the problem, as well as the names of county and federal law officers that the Weavers had spoken to regarding the situation. The document also contained the sentence, "I make legal and official notice that I believe I may have to defend myself and my family from a physical attack on my life." Randy Weaver's statement exhibited great foresight. May 12, 1985. "These niggers are really starting to irritate me. Are we all set for tomorrow morning?" The mayor asked the managing director as he looked at his watch and saw that it was almost 10 o'clock. "I want to get home and get to bed." Leo Brooks suppressed a wince at the black mayor's choice of words. "I just talked with Commissioner Samber about an hour ago," Brooks replied. "They're ready to go in tomorrow morning early, between 4:30 and 5. "They have enough men and equipment on it to get it done the first time?" "Yes, sir. The MOVE members have blocked themselves in. The police have confirmed that they've reinforced the building on Osage with railroad ties and logs. Greg's putting a demolition team in the houses on either side of them. They'll need to blast some holes in the sidewalls. Way the MOVE house is barricaded, that's the only shot at getting stun grenades and tear gas inside. They better have enough to make sure it gets done. I told Sambor I want those people out of there, like yesterday. He knows that. He said they can blast through the side walls, and if there's any trouble getting through that way, they'll do the roof. Full load of tear gas, we should see him vacate pretty quick. First step's got to be explosives, though. Got to blast holes so they can get the stun grenades and tear gas in." "Fine," Mayor Good said to Managing Director Brooks. "I'll be asleep when they go in. Give me a call in the morning. Maybe at breakfast I can turn on the news and see them being hauled off in handcuffs." He shook his head as he turned to leave. "The last thing I need is for the neighbors to hold another goddamn news conference." Good walked out of the room. The situation, which was so vexing to Philadelphia's mayor, involved a loosely knit group of blacks that called itself MOVE. In 1978, at another Philadelphia location, MOVE members had been involved in a confrontation with police that had resulted in the death of 1 officer and injuries to 4 policemen and 4 firemen. 9 MOVE members were serving time in prison for third-degree murder because of what had happened that day. Now, 7 years later, MOVE members in a house on Osage Avenue had decided to force the city of Philadelphia to negotiate the release of their jailed brethren. The group came up with a novel 4-pronged strategy to achieve this goal. They reinforced their dwelling with railroad ties, tree trunks, and pieces of steel. They stopped paying their utility bills. They allowed garbage to pile up in front of their house, and they used loudspeakers to broadcast diatribes against President Reagan and Mayor Good. The MOVE Group's plan had failed in its goal of coercing the city of Philadelphia into getting the 9 men released from prison. It had, however, succeeded in irritating the other residents of the middle-class neighborhood on and around Osage Avenue. The neighbors, who wished the radical group would live up to the name it had chosen for itself, called a news conference in late April and strongly criticized the mayor for his failure to take action. A week later, Mayor Good ordered Police Commissioner Greg Sambor to develop a plan to storm the MOVE house. That plan was about to be executed. May 13, 1985. Philadelphia Mayor W. W. Good was not happy as he watched the live news coverage on his television set. The siege had been going on for several hours, and the MOVE members were still inside their house. He flicked off the set and headed out the door to go to his office. "Brooks, I said I wanted those people out of there," Good said once more into the telephone. It was perhaps his 15th conversation that day with Philadelphia's managing director, who was on the scene near the MOVE house on Osage Avenue. The MOVE group was still inside. When the police had started to break holes in the walls to set their explosives, the occupants of the house had realized they were under siege and had fired randomly to drive off the attackers. No officers had been injured, but they were now afraid to resume their efforts in their former positions. "Sir, you have to understand the situation here. We've had to abandon our positions on either side." They're shooting from inside, and it's too risky for... You're not listening to me, Brooks, the mayor said, cutting off his subordinate. I've told you, and I've told Sambor, that all I want to know is what is important and necessary. I can see on my own goddamn television set here in the office that they're still in there. You're not telling me anything I don't already know. Samber's supposed to drive them out, so what the hell is he sitting there jerking off for? Call me when you've got something to say, the mayor instructed, and hung up the phone. Leo Brooks looked at the dead receiver in his hand. He was in a position that was utterly unfamiliar to him, and he did not like it. He wished the mayor would talk to the police commissioner directly instead of going through him. Brooks was tired of having the mayor jump down his throat when the MOVE members didn't dutifully march outside to be arrested. Brooks sighed and went to confer with the police commissioner once again. Sir, it's going to have to be through the roof. Samber's got to get the tear gas in. He says that's the only way, and I believe him. The cops can't set any charges by hand. They're afraid they'll be shot at. Brooks did not point out that getting shot was one of the risks you ran when you tried to dynamite someone's house while they were inside. He's got a bomb rigged up, and a helicopter... Is it going to work? The mayor demanded. Well, he seems to think so, Leo Brooks said. Brooks did not point out that if it did, it would be the first and only thing that had gone right that day. He wants to make sure it's okay with you. I told him to get those people out of there. If that's what it takes, get him on it right now. We've been wasting too damn much time on this. Yes, sir. Leo Brooks hung up and went to find Greg Sambor. The helicopter pilot eyed the makeshift cargo with distinct unease. In flight fire was every pilot's worst nightmare. Having a passenger carry an obviously full 5-gallon gas can as baggage was not conducive to pilot peace of mind, particularly when the gas can had some odd shapes taped to the side of it. The pilot would have been even less enthused had he known more details about the package that was about to be dropped on top of the MOVE members. Attached to the gas can with duct tape was a 9.5-pound block of C4 plastic explosive with a makeshift detonator. Almost all of the journalists who would later write about the events of May 13th would talk about the bomb that was dropped from the helicopter, but would omit or fail to mention the particular type of explosive that was used. The omission would not be by design, but rather by ignorance, for few journalists covering the story had been in active military service. Among members of the public who did have military experience or who were familiar with such matters, and who somehow learned the details of the police department's makeshift bomb, the reaction was universal. C4? Jesus Christ. Where the fuck did a bunch of Philadelphia cops get 10 pounds of C4? From the pilot's point of view, the delivery went well despite his earlier misgivings. The helicopter was not shot at, and the pilot was able to fly the chopper well clear of the roof of the MOVE house by the time the charge was detonated. Holy fuck, what was that? One of the firemen yelled. The tremendous concussion had made him lose his balance and caused windows around him to shatter. He shook his head to try to clear the ringing from his ears. Then he looked at the MOVE house, which was over 100 yards away. Oh shit, he said as he started to run towards the truck to which he was assigned. The entire roof of the house on Osage Avenue was on fire, and the flames were spreading to the adjacent buildings. Anyone dead in any of the other buildings? No, sir, or at least we haven't found anyone yet. We had some time to warn them, and we think we got everyone out. Of course, you never know. Somebody sleeping off a drunk, that kind of thing. He let the sentence dangle, and Leo Brooks nodded. 10 blocks, Leo Brooks said softly. He was thinking that if the mayor were white, there would definitely be a race riot. A bit of gallows humor came to mind, and he smiled at the subordinate. Right about now, the neighbors are probably thinking that garbage in the lawn and incoherent broadcasts about Reagan and the mayor weren't so bad after all. Brooks knew already that he would have to resign. The tremendous blast had shattered everything made of wood for a considerable distance around the center of the explosion. The result had been huge quantities of tinder that the flaming gasoline vapor had soaked instantly, creating a roaring inferno that the fire department had been totally unprepared to control. The fire had instantly spread to residences around the MOVE house. It consumed a 10-block area and destroyed 61 homes, leaving over 250 Philadelphia residents without any of their possessions or a place to live. Miraculously, there had been no fatalities outside of the move house. Inside the residence of the radical group, it was a different story. The crude barricades the MOVE members had constructed only served to exacerbate the deadly combination of 20th century military explosives technology and a flammable petroleum accelerant. The reinforcements were largely made of wood, and the railroad ties were of course soaked with creosote. The MOVE house went up like a tinderbox. Only 2 of the members managed to escape the inferno. 7 adults and 4 children were burned alive inside their home on Osage Avenue. The 2 men watched the television screen with both fascination and horror. The host, who was older than his guest by 3 years, kept his thoughts to himself. The 68-year-old visitor, however, found the news footage too wrenching for him to remain silent. "It is just like Warsaw 40 years ago," Irwin Mann said. "It looks exactly the same." "They just didn't bother to build a wall around him first, before lighting up the torch," Max Collins replied. The nightmares that had finally stopped disturbing Irwin Mann's sleep in the late 1950s would return that evening with a vengeance. February 12, 1986. "Hi, Mom. Hi, Dad," Cindy Caswell said as she walked through the back door and into the kitchen. "Who gave you that?" Boone Caswell demanded. "Boy at school. Valentine's Day's on Sunday," Cindy said with a big smile. "Dad is such a dweeb sometimes," she thought. "Fella give you something, he's going to expect something back." Her father's voice had a trace of a whine in it. "Dad, it's just some candy, and Kevin doesn't expect anything. If he did, I'd beat him up. I'm bigger than he is. We can eat it for dessert tonight. I think it's the kind you like, and I don't need the extra calories anyway." Cindy Caswell dropped the box of chocolates on the kitchen counter, kissed her father on the cheek, smiled at her mother, and walked to her bedroom. Her father said nothing. In the past 18 months, a surprising transformation had come over the Caswell family. Cindy had started going through puberty at age 13. As her figure had swelled and her features had become more defined, it had become obvious that she was about to turn into a truly stunning young woman. When Cindy's breasts had started to develop, and her legs had become long and shapely, Myra Caswell had been filled with dread. She had expected her husband to start in with the touching and petting that he had practiced with their 2 older daughters before the girls had gone to live with Myra's parents. What Myra feared most, however, had never happened. Boone was getting older. He was almost 50, but that wasn't the whole of it. It was Cindy. There was something about her that was much different from her sisters. Cindy Caswell had always been able to get boys to do things for her, and by age 14 it was obvious that she held the same kind of power over her father. Cindy Caswell had known about her father's nighttime visits to her sisters before they had left home, and she had prepared herself for the inevitable event when he would come to her room some late night. She had planned to tell him that if he continued, it was going to be the only time it would ever happen, and that she would then be gone from the house forever. Cindy had not been sure whether her plan would actually work. She feared her father would track her down, or that she might otherwise be forced to return. Cindy never had the chance to find out. Her father never touched her. She thought it might be because of his friends who sometimes came over to the house. They were big, coarse men just like Boone, but when she entered the room their voices softened and their words became much less harsh. Sometimes she thought her father had somehow been shamed by the actions of these men. Sometimes she didn't know what to think. Cindy had a gift for projecting an atmosphere which surrounded her and anyone nearby. Dramatics became her strongest interest, and she shone in every school play where she had a part. Myra Caswell, who had watched her first 2 daughters grow to loathe their father, gave thanks every single day that the same fate had not befallen her last child. She knew in her heart that her daughter Cindy would still be living happily in their home when she graduated from high school. She knew that Cindy would live with them until she found a decent young man to share her life with, or decided to move on for other good reasons of her own choosing. Unfortunately, Myra Caswell was dead wrong. March 12, 1986. The man scowled with disappointment and slight irritation as he saw the 2 men on the other side of the lake. Colazzo had come to the water-filled rock pit just south of the Tamiami Trail that morning to do some plinking. Soon after he arrived, the 2 men got in their vehicle, a white Ford pickup, and drove over to where he was standing. It was common for Florida residents in the area to target practice in the Everglades, and the man did not think anything was amiss until he saw the driver climb out and level a revolver at him. By then it was too late for him to get to his guns, and he stood there unarmed. "Empty your pockets," the second man said. He held a Ruger Mini 14 rifle. "Slowly. We're taking your money, your guns, and your car." The unarmed man did as he was instructed, noting with dismay that the hand holding the revolver trained on him was absolutely steady. "Down by the water, Spick," the driver ordered. Colazzo complied with the command as feelings of despair washed over him. "You a cop?" the second man demanded. "No." Colazzo saw the first man nod as if to himself and realized the man was about to kill him. He had nothing to lose, so he rushed the gunman. The man with the revolver fired twice. Colazzo felt as if he had been slapped in the side, but he was charged with adrenaline and he did not go down. He grabbed for the man with the gun. Several more shots rang out. Colazzo never knew which of the two men fired the one that hit him. The bullet struck Colazzo just to the right of his right eye, passed under the skin, and exited out the side. The blow to his skull stunned Colazzo, and he collapsed on the bank. The skin was torn open on the side of his head. Like most superficial head wounds, it bled profusely. The two men took one look at the inert form with blood pouring out the side of its head and assumed the man was dead. They gathered up their victim's keys, money, and guns and started walking to the two vehicles. "What is it about spies in late 70s Monte Carlos?" one of the men asked the other as he got in Colazzo's black 1979 model and adjusted the seat. His friend looked blank, then grinned as he remembered. 5 months before, in October, they had executed a young man in much the same fashion. His name had been Emilio Uriel, and he had also been out target shooting in the area. They had killed him and stolen his car, a beige 1977 Monte Carlo. The two men had ditched the vehicle immediately after a job on January 10th. "You got me," his friend said with a laugh. He climbed into the Ford pickup, started the engine, and led the way down the dirt path out to the highway. Colazzo was not dead and would in fact recover from his wounds. He would also make a complete report to the authorities about the events of that morning. The FBI would listen to his story with great interest. It would dovetail perfectly with several other pieces of information they already had about several pending cases. Michael Platt and Edward Matix were the names of the two men who had shot Colazzo that morning and left him for dead. Some law enforcement personnel would later examine the exploits of the two criminals as part of their police training. The FBI would go so far as to film a reenactment of what was about to come. Apart from these examples, however, it would be private citizens with a serious commitment to shooting skills who would show the most interest. Among members of the gun culture, Platt and Matix were about to become famous. March 29th, 1986. "Hi, Stokely. Henry, you're just the guy I wanted to see. Everybody that comes in the store wants to know what the story is on this Volkmer McClure bill. Adrian here was saying he's heard it's probably going to pass, but everyone tells me something different about what's in it. You've got more federal licenses than this store. Can you explain what the bill says?" Volkmer's office says they're swamped. Henry Bowman walked over to the group of men standing by the used handgun display case and ran his fingers through his hair. "Starting from the beginning, which is a habit I learned from my father who taught history, the 1968 Gun Control Act was passed in the middle of a bunch of hysteria, and was also combined with the Omnibus Crime and Safe Streets Act. Bobby Kennedy had been shot. Martin Luther King Jr. had been shot. The '68 Democratic Convention had resulted in a riot. All gun laws are bad, but there were some especially ludicrous ones in the '68 Act. In addition, after '68, states started passing wildly differing state laws about guns, with little or no recognition of the fact that people driving through might not be aware of them. The main thrust of Volkmer McClure is to remove the most pointless aspects of GCA 68 and give people in transit a federal umbrella so they don't get nailed for doing something they didn't know was illegal." "What do you mean by that?" asked a man Henry had never seen before. "The second part, I mean. Well, right now you own a rifle in Missouri and you're completely legal. Let's say you apply for and get an out-of-state moose tag to go hunt moose in the state of Maine. They're eager for you to come with your .338 Winchester. You were going to drive, but realized you'd break some state laws along the way by having your unloaded gun in the trunk of your car. So you hop on a nonstop flight to Maine with your rifle declared in checked baggage. 150 miles from Bangor, one engine gets low oil pressure or is running hot, or there's something wrong at the runway, so the flight is diverted to the nearest major airport, which is Logan in Boston. TWA says they'll put you up for the night and fly you out in the morning. The plane lands in Boston. Under current law, the instant the wheels touch the ground, you are now a felon. You are in Massachusetts with a rifle and without a firearms ID card, and that is a felony that carries a mandatory 1-year jail sentence. It's Massachusetts law. There's no exemption just because you didn't want to be in Massachusetts. Volkmer McClure says that if you are legal where you live and legal where you're going, states in between can't arrest you in transit if your guns are cased and unloaded. The man shook his head and laughed. Nobody's going to arrest one of us for driving out to a hunt somewhere, with or without this new bill you're talking about. Henry shrugged. Dream on, Jim, he thought silently. Stupid laws apply to everyone, even rich white people. Maybe not, Henry said, but Volkmer McClure makes it legal, so you don't have to worry. The other main provision is that all the record-keeping requirements and interstate commerce restrictions on ammo are lifted. And hally-fucking-luya to that, Stokely Meyer said. The Gun Control Act of 1968 had forced all stores and places of business that sold ammunition to keep detailed, permanent records of every purchase and purchaser of handgun ammunition. In 18 years, over 50 billion rounds of handgun ammunition had been sold, but the record-keeping requirement had yet to account for a single criminal being brought to justice. There's a few other things in the bill, mostly to let old stuff get imported again, like Krags and Mausers. Henry smiled inwardly as he thought of his first centerfire, the 8mm Model 98 Mauser he had bought when he was 10 years old. He still put a few hundred rounds through it each year. Anything bad in it? One of the men asked. Not that I know of. I think I would have heard if there was. It's just straight repeal of some bad stuff. Henry Bowman was right. The Firearms Owners Protection Act, which was the official title of the Volkmer McClure bill, contained no new infringements. That would hold true right up until 30 seconds before the bill was passed by the United States Congress. April 10th, 1986. Okay, let me recap what we know and how we're going to proceed, Special Agent Gordon MacNeil said as he stared at the 13 FBI agents under his supervision. These 2 men have hit 5 banks or armored cars that we know of in a 6-month period. In 2 of those 5 instances, they shot guards without provocation. One of them they shot 3 times in the back. They also shot 2 citizens execution style down in the Everglades to get their cars. He looked at each of his men. These guys like to kill people, he added meaningfully. On October 16th, 2 men in ski masks hit a Wells Fargo armored car parked in front of a Winn-Dixie on Dixie Highway. They had a shotgun and a .45, yelled freeze, then shot the driver in the leg and ran off without getting any money. November 8th, 2 men in ski masks grabbed 2 employees at the drive-in of the Florida National Bank on Dixie Highway. They never got in the bank because the teller fumbled with his keys, but they got away with $10,000 that was being brought from the bank to the drive-in window. An hour and a half later on the same day, 2 men in ski masks hit the Professional Savings Bank on Dixie Highway, 18 blocks away from Florida National. They did a little better at this $41,000. One of the other agents whistled at the dollar amount. Right. Witnesses said the men were armed with a large frame revolver and an AR-15 and escaped in a 1977 Monte Carlo. MacNeil stopped to clear his throat. January 10th of this year, 2 men, again in dark clothing and again wearing ski masks, held up the Brinks armored car in front of the Barnett Bank on Dixie Highway. One of them shot the guard in the back. When the guard collapsed, the other shot him twice more in the back with an AR-15 and took his gun. This time they got $54,000 in cash. This figure drew even more murmurs of appreciation. Witnesses saw the men escape in a beige Monte Carlo with a light-colored vinyl top. One of them followed the car and... "What?" one of the agents exclaimed. "Yes. One of the witnesses followed the two men and saw them abandon the Monte Carlo and continue their flight in a white or beige 3/4-ton pickup truck. He thinks it was a Ford. What? He didn't follow that one too? And tell us where they went, or better yet, arrest him while he was at it? Gordon MacNeil said nothing. In a few moments he had their attention again. The abandoned Monte Carlo was recovered. It was registered to a Mr. Aureliano Brielle. Mr. Brielle's son Emilio Brielle was reported missing in October. Emilio Brielle was last seen on October 4th, when he took the Monte Carlo and told his father he was going target shooting with A-22 rifle in the Everglades. On March 1st, skeletal remains of a decomposed body were found 7/10 of a mile south of the Tamiami Trail. Analysis confirmed that it was the body of Emilio Brielle, who had been killed by a large caliber handgun wound to the head. On March 12th, we got a break. Mr. Jose Colazzo was out target shooting on a small lake south of the Tamiami Trail in the same general area that Brielle's body had been found. Colazzo was accosted by two men driving a white Ford pickup who held him at gunpoint, took his money, guns, and keys, and shot him several times. They left him for dead and took his car. Colazzo survived. He has given us a description of the two men, and you have the artist's sketches in front of you. Colazzo's car is a black 1979 Chevrolet Monte Carlo, license plate NTJ 891. These scroats got a thing about Monte Carlos or what? One of the agents joked. Supervisory Agent MacNeil ignored him. 7 days after the attempted murder of Jose Colazzo, MacNeil went on March 19th, two men wearing ski masks and dark clothing robbed the Barnett Bank on Dixie Highway. Same bank as before? One of the agents asked. Right, they got away with $8,000 this time, and their getaway car was a black two-door Chevrolet Monte Carlo. Gordon MacNeil looked at the 13 agents in front of him. All 5 of these bank and armored car robberies were committed in a small area along Dixie Highway by 2 heavily armed men in ski masks. The FBI is certain that the same 2 men committed all 5 robberies and were also responsible for the murder of Brielle and the attempted murder of Jose Colazzo. Accordingly, the 14 of us are going to set up a 10-car rolling stakeout along Dixie Highway with the goal of spotting and apprehending these 2 assholes. We've got 2 good vehicle descriptions and 1 license plate number, and we'll be in constant radio contact with each other. We've got a good chance of finding these scumbags. You really think they'll be in the same car and not have ditched it or changed the plates? Asked one of the agents. After this much time, I mean? Good chance of it. Brielle's beige Monte Carlo was abandoned January 10th. That was more than 3 months after Brielle was killed and the car stolen from him, and it still had the original plates on it. They ditched that car only after shooting the guard. On the bank job 3 weeks ago, no one was shot. These guys may still be driving that car around. They think Colazzo's dead, remember? MacNeil flipped to a map and went on to the next phase of his briefing. Here's how we're going to work it. Tomorrow morning we're going to spread the 10 cars out along a 5-mile stretch of Dixie Highway, and the briefing session continued for another half hour. April 11th, 1986. Attention all units, we are behind a black vehicle, 2-door Florida license NTJ 891. We're headed south on South Dixie. North on South Dixie, he corrected. It's a black Monte Carlo, 2 males in it, NTJ 891. Ben Grogan had spotted Colazzo's stolen car and was directly behind it. The FBI had lucked into the 2 bank robbers in the first half hour of the first day of the surveillance. Grogan was calling all the other cars on the rolling stakeout. Ooh, that's it. Lift up a little. Yeah, right there, the FBI agent told the waitress, then resumed his thrusting. She was lying on her back on the table in the closed-off back room of the restaurant on Dixie Highway. You like starting the day off this way, honey? He asked teasingly. She can't talk with her mouth full, laughed his partner on the other side of the table. But I'd say she's enjoying it. Mm-hmm, the girl mumbled in agreement. Watch those teeth now, darlin', the second man said as he pushed down her bra and squeezed the woman's full breasts. After a few minutes, the first agent raised his hand up for a high five. The second agent saw this and mirrored his partner's move. Ready, shift? The first man yelled as he slapped his partner's hand. The two agents simultaneously disengaged themselves from the woman's vagina and mouth and rapidly exchanged positions. Cop groupies are great, the first man thought with a grin. And it's good to be able to share it with your partner. He briefly thought of the Heckler & Koch MP5 submachine guns, and a look of concern passed over his face. The two weapons were lying underneath two sets of body armor on the back seat of the unmarked sedan out in the parking lot. Hell, nobody's going to steal them in broad daylight. Not in the next hour or two, at least he decided, and returned his concentration to the situation at hand. Much later, after the two agents had finished their exertions, had a few cups of coffee with their friend, and returned to the parking lot, the first man would discover that he had been right. No one had given the parked sedan or its contents a second look. They're making a right turn on 117th. Right on 117th. Jerry Dove. Grogan's partner continued over the radio. We're burned. They're on to us. They know we're cops. Moving around, lots of activity in the front seat. Special Agent Richard Manauzi had been close by, and in less than a minute he had maneuvered his vehicle in behind Grogan and Dove's car. Within moments, Agents John Hanlon and Edmundo Mireles, in their unmarked sedan, had joined the other two FBI cars following the black Monte Carlo. Keep on him, Agent McNeil, the supervisor said on the radio to the other cars when he heard the exchange. I'm heading north on Dixie. I'll turn east on 120th and parallel you. The Monte Carlo, however, had made one right turn and was about to make another. We're turning west on 120th Street, Dove, in the lead FBI car announced. Platt and Matix in the Monte Carlo, followed by three FBI cars, were about to pass Supervisor McNeil, who was headed in the opposite direction on 120th Street. Hey, we're right behind you, John Hanlon, driving the third FBI car, called. If you want to do it, let's do it. The FBI supervisor saw the four cars headed towards him. Agent McNeil looked at the driver of the black Monte Carlo and saw what he would later describe as the face of a man on a mission. He also saw that the man in the passenger seat was putting a magazine into what McNeil recognized was a Ruger Mini 14 rifle. Guy in the passenger seat has a long gun he's loading. Looks like a Mini 14, McNeil called over the radio as he passed the Monte Carlo and the three FBI cars. McNeil braked his sedan to make a U-turn and joined the other three federal vehicles as the Monte Carlo turned left and began to head south on 82nd Avenue. Let's do it, McNeil ordered over the radio. Felony car stop. Let's do it. John Hanlon, behind the wheel of the second FBI car, drew his Smith & Wesson, .357 Magnum, and put it on the seat beside him. Then he stomped on the throttle and pulled around Ben Grogan and Jerry Dove's vehicle until he and his partner, Ed Mireles, were parallel to the black Monte Carlo. Hanlon rammed the Monte Carlo, trying to force it off the right side of the road. Jerry Dove, in turn, pulled around both John Hanlon's sedan and the black Monte Carlo and pulled directly in front of the two felons to keep them from outrunning the car that was trying to force them off the road. Richard Manauzi, in the third FBI vehicle, was now immediately behind the black Chevrolet. Michael Platt and Edward Matix were boxed in. Those two have a clear shot at blasting all four agents, Manauzi thought grimly as he drew his revolver and put it on his lap. Got to distract them. He floored the accelerator and rammed Platt and Matix's black Monte Carlo from behind. When Agent Manauzi slammed his sedan into the back of the Monte Carlo, he caused several things to happen. The first was that, as per Newton's law, Manauzi's revolver flew off his lap and the driver's door flew open. Manauzi was carrying no backup gun, and a feeling of horror suffused him as he visualized his only weapon lying yards behind him out in the street. The force of the impact also disengaged the Monte Carlo from Hanlon's vehicle, shoving it forward. Matix, the Monte Carlo's driver, had cranked his wheels to the left to counteract Hanlon's attempt to push him off the road. Thus, when Manauzi's car bunted the Chevy on ahead, the black two-door immediately spun out counterclockwise. Matix rode the slide back onto the pavement and punched the throttle when the car was facing in the opposite direction. Platt and Matix were now heading back north on 82nd Avenue. Hanlon and Mireles' car, on the other hand, had had its wheels cranked right to force the black car off the road. When the Monte Carlo was knocked clear, Hanlon's sedan spun to the right in the gravel at the side of the road and slammed head-on into a concrete wall. Newton's law was still in effect. As with Manauzi's gun, Agent Hanlon's revolver flew off the front seat and out of reach in the impact. Agent Richard Manazzi saw the black Monte Carlo headed towards him. The two men were about to escape, and he was now unarmed. He knew Grogan and Dove were up ahead of him, and they still had to get turned around. Not this time, pal, he thought as he spun his wheel hard left and rammed into the driver's side of the approaching Monte Carlo, forcing it into a tree on the side of the road. His own car slewed to a stop parallel to the black two-door, in a position similar to two cars side by side in a parking lot. Agent Manazzi was hyperventilating as he looked over at the Monte Carlo. The driver's window of the black car was rolled down. One man was bringing a 12-gauge shotgun to bear on him, and the other was raising a rifle. It was then that the full weight of realization hit FBI agent Manazzi. I am in deep shit. He flung open the door of his sedan and ducked his head as he bailed out of the car. The shotgun boomed, and the muzzle blast of the 223 rifle rang in his ears as the two men fired at him from 6 feet away. The shots had to come through the glass on the passenger side of Agent Manazzi's sedan, however. The high-velocity rifle bullets fragmented, and the shotgun pellets were slowed. Manazzi was taking his first step when he felt lead fragments dig into his shoulder and torso. He gritted his teeth and kept running for the other side of the street, where he hoped to find his lost revolver. Supervisory Agent Gordon N.C. Neal, who had passed the others in the opposite direction less than a minute before, had gotten his car turned around and was almost to the bank robber's vehicle when he saw Manazzi force the Monte Carlo into the tree. He swung his car in at an angle to Manazzi's sedan. A few seconds before, Mac Neal had managed to throw his vest on over his head, but had not been able to secure it with the Velcro straps to his torso. Like all of the agents, he had been carrying body armor. Also, like all of the agents but one, he had not been wearing it, but had left it lying on the seat of his car. Mac Neal knew that the two men were already shooting at him, for he could hear the bullet striking his car even before he came to a stop. He wanted the shotgun that was lying on the floor of the back seat, but when shots through his windshield sprayed him with glass fragments, Gordon MacNeil changed his mind. He couldn't afford to expose himself by retrieving the more effective weapon, so he drew his .250 Smith & Wesson, .357 Magnum, and ran for cover. His unsecured, bullet-resistant vest flapped around him as MacNeil took a position behind the engine block of Manazzi's wrecked car. That put Supervisory Agent Gordon MacNeil about 8 feet from Platt and Maddox, directly facing the deafening muzzle blast coming from their guns. As MacNeil exited his car and ran for cover, more agents joined in the fray. Ben Grogan, who had gotten his car turned around and had resumed pursuit, slammed on the brakes and brought his white Buick to a screeching halt behind the black Monte Carlo. Newton's law reasserted itself once more. Under the car's abrupt deceleration, Grogan's eyeglasses flew off his face and lodged under the sedan's brake pedal. Grogan and Dove both jumped out of the car and started firing at the men in the black Monte Carlo, although Grogan was essentially blind. Neither Grogan nor Dove, however, had lost their weapons. Each man was carrying a Smith & Wesson Model 459 semi-auto that held 15 rounds of 9mm ammo. Platt and Maddox could not open either door of their stolen vehicle to escape. The right one was caved in and jammed shut from the crash, and the left was blocked by Manazzi's FBI car. As MacNeil, Grogan, and Dove began firing at the two men trapped in the front seat of the Monte Carlo, Hanlon and Morellas jumped out of their car, the one that had spun and crashed into the concrete wall. Morellas was carrying a Remington 870 shotgun as he ran over to join Gordon MacNeil. Hanlon, who had lost his main gun in the crash, drew his 5-shot Chief special backup gun from his ankle holster and ran to join Ben Grogan, who was firing blindly from the left rear of his Buick. As Morellas ran towards MacNeil, he realized his shotgun was pointing straight at his fellow agent, and he instinctively took his finger out of the trigger guard and raised the muzzle towards the sky just as Platt fired his Ruger. 223 at the center of Morellas' unprotected chest. The move saved Morellas' life. Raising the shotgun put Morellas' left arm directly in front of his heart. The high-velocity bullet struck Morellas' upraised forearm, shattering both bones and turning the flesh almost inside out. The 280 LB agent fell to the ground and looked at his ruined left arm. White bones were sticking out for a distance of over 3 inches. Puta! It's turned inside out. Have to be amputated, he thought, then turned his mind to matters he could control. Funny how it doesn't hurt, Morellas realized distractedly. As Morales hit the asphalt, Platt continued to fire his. 223. One of his next few shots hit Gordon MacNeil's gun hand, throwing the agent's right arm to a vertical position. Oh, Jesus, MacNeil thought as he looked at the horrendous ruin of his right hand. Well, it doesn't hurt, and I didn't let go of my gun. He brought the gun back down and kept firing at Platt and Maddox. The FBI agent watched Maddox jerk when one of the Winchester silver tips out of his. 357 Magnum hit him. Then the agent's gun snapped on a fired case. Gordon MacNeil felt utterly deflated. I'm empty, and they're both still firing. He forced himself to run to his own car to reload. His mind was fully occupied, and he did not notice Ed Morales heave himself to his feet and follow him, carrying the shotgun and cradling his ruined left arm. Where is everybody? Ben Grogan screamed from the left side of his white Buick, behind the black Monte Carlo. He was firing his Model 459 in the direction of Platt and Maddox, but he could not see without his glasses. His partner, Jerry Dove, crouched behind the right side of their car and continued to fire 9mm bullets out of his own 15-shot Model 459. So far, he had not hit either of the two men in the black Monte Carlo. This is a fucking nightmare, thought Agent Ron Resner. He and his partner Gil Arantia had stopped their car across the street and slightly north to block an escape. Risner, who had been riding in the passenger seat, was now crouched behind the right front fender of the car and firing his 15-shot 459 over the hood at the two men in the Chevrolet. Risner was the only agent who had been wearing his vest when the two FBI vehicles had rammed the black Monte Carlo. Gil Arantia had remained in the driver's seat of the car and was firing his. .38 revolver over the windowsill. The two agents were a little over 20 yards away from Platt and Maddox. This was much farther away from the two bank robbers than any of the other agents in the shootout. Maddox realized he was in a two-door coffin with a vinyl top. He slammed his shoulder into the driver's door of the Monte Carlo and got it open enough to squeeze out. Get out the window, I'll try to cover you, Maddox said to his friend, then slid out of the car and sent a load of buckshot at Grogan and Dove's car to pin them down. Michael Platt began to climb out the Monte Carlo's passenger side window with his Mini 14 and several spare magazines. Perfect thought agents Risner and Dove from two very different locations as they saw the man climbing out the car window. Both fired their S&W 459 semi-autos at Platt's center of mass. Platt felt Risner's silver tip plow into his chest muscle, and he let out a grunt at the force of the impact. Fucker, Platt thought, just as the second Winchester silver tip, this one from Jerry Dove's gun, hit him in the arm and tore through the brachial artery leading to his heart. Michael Platt, his arm wound, pumping blood like a small hose, rolled across the hood of a Cutlass sedan parked next to the Monte Carlo and landed on his feet. He was still holding his rifle and his loaded magazines as he crouched behind the vehicle. As Maddox exited the driver's side of the Monte Carlo while firing his shotgun, Gil Arantia across the street realized his own gun was dry, and he flattened himself on the seat to reload his revolver from a belt pouch. Gordon MacNeil was lying on the ground by his car. Gotta keep from being hit, MacNeil thought as he saw bullets kicking up dust around him. He began rolling back and forth on the ground between his own car and Manauzi's vehicle, trying to reload his revolver with his ruined right hand as he did so. Blood and bone fragments were getting into the rear of the cylinder, and MacNeil realized in dismay that his gun might not close. Got to get the shotgun, he told himself. Can't take the time to get all 6 in this cylinder. The agent stopped after he had put 2 rounds in the gun. That'll do till I get the 8 and 70, he thought, and began to close the revolver. Which way does it turn, he asked himself, then snapped it shut so that the 2 cartridges were to the right of the firing position when viewed from the rear. He pushed himself to his feet to get to the shotgun lying in the back seat of his car. When MacNeil had been lying on the ground, his vehicle had concealed him from Michael Platt. Now he was exposed. MacNeil realized in horror that the man was aiming his Ruger Mini 14 straight in his face from 15 feet away, and was actually grinning at him. Michael Platt, with 2 Winchester Sylvatips in his chest and his heart pumping blood relentlessly out of his body, smiled at Gordon MacNeil. Platt squeezed the trigger of his rifle 3 times in rapid succession. MacNeil felt the air from one, 223 bullet passing, and a flick to his ear from the second before the third slug struck him in the side of the neck. The bullet ricocheted off his spinal column and lodged in his chest cavity. MacNeil dropped as if he had been poleaxed. Gordon MacNeil lay on the asphalt, completely conscious but unable to move anything below his neck. I'm paralyzed, the supervisor thought. I'm paralyzed from the neck down, and these two are going to kill my men and get away. For the first time in the 21 years since he had joined the FBI, Gordon MacNeil felt utterly and completely helpless. Michael Platt thought he had just killed the agent. He took a few steps back, unaware that he was bleeding to death. The FBI would later claim that the wound from Dove's bullet would not have been survivable even if Platt had surrendered immediately and been airlifted to a hospital. This was not strictly correct. If Michael Platt had pinched off the wound and somehow managed to avoid further bullets while retreating to safety, he could have survived. As it was, Michael Platt stood under some trees, out of sight of the agents who were pinned down by the shotgun fire from his partner Maddox. Time to smoke the rest of these pricks, he thought, as he reloaded his Mini-14 with a fresh magazine and started walking towards where Grogan, Dove, and Hanlon were crouched behind Grogan's Buick. Jerry Dove ejected the empty magazine from his S&W 459 and inserted a full 14-round replacement. He stayed crouched behind the Buick and resumed firing. "Where is everybody?" Ben Grogan shouted again. His voice was full of sorrow and frustration. He was standing at the left rear of the white Buick, firing his 15-shot S&W Model 459 towards the sound of Matix's shotgun. Ben Grogan was utterly blind without his glasses. Agent Hanlon, 7 feet to Grogan's right and crouched behind the right taillight of the white Buick, saw Michael Platt emerge from behind cover and come towards the 3 agents who were firing at him and his partner. Hanlon emptied his 5-shot Chief's special revolver at Platt. He cursed himself once more for losing his main weapon when he ran his car into the concrete wall. Hanlon dropped into a crouch and started to reload his gun when a slug from Platt's rifle just missed his arm. He felt it pass and moved to the left. Platt's next shot shattered Hanlon's right hand, tore through his forearm, and lodged in his bleep. "Ah!" Hanlon screamed in agony as he rolled over onto his back. "I'm hit!" Ron Risner, across the street, had emptied his 15-shot Model 459 at Michael Platt. His partner, Gilarantia, had emptied his revolver twice and had been wounded, though not critically. Risner drew his 2-barreled backup. As Arantia frantically threw open the glove compartment, looking for the spare 50-round box of ammunition kept in every FBI vehicle. Risner fired 1 shot from his 2 Model 60 and realized he could not shoot the short weapon accurately at that distance. He put a fresh 14-round magazine in his 459 and extended the weapon in front of him just as Hanlon went down. "Oh, fuck," Risner thought as his stomach turned over. Michael Platt had left his position behind the parked car and was headed for the white Buick that Ben Grogan and Jerry Dove were hiding behind. He was firing his Mini-14 as he approached. Ron Risner could not shoot because from Risner's vantage point across the street, Grogan and Dove were both between him and Michael Platt, directly in Risner's line of fire. Hanlon was lying on his back at the rear of the Buick, clutching his arm. He turned his head so he could see underneath the car. He saw Platt's feet wearing Nike running shoes walking towards him. Hanlon dug his heels into the asphalt and began to slide himself towards Jerry Dove and away from the approaching Platt. "He's coming behind you! He's coming behind you!" Risner screamed from across the street. Grogan and Dove had all their attention focused elsewhere, and they did not hear him. Platt swung his rifle on Ben Grogan. "Oh my God!" Grogan screamed, and then fell dead. Platt had put 3 slugs into his torso from 7 feet away. "See how your wife likes this," Michael Platt said as he leaned over the fender of the Buick. Platt fired his Mini-14 once into Hanlon's groin from a distance of about 5 feet. The 223 bullet missed Hanlon's penis but struck the joint of his pelvic bone, sending a hail of bone fragments into his guts. Platt then turned his attention to Jerry Dove. "Your turn, Sonny," Michael Platt added as he shifted his aim and squeezed the trigger twice more. The bullets caught the young agent as he was trying to turn towards his attacker. Dove dropped his Model 459, through which he had just fired 29 rounds, and fell face first on the asphalt. Agent Dove pushed against the ground, trying to get up. Michael Platt leaned over the trunk of the Buick, covering it with the blood pumping out of his upper arm, and fired 2 quick rounds into Dove's brain. Dove's head made a thudding noise as it hit the pavement a few inches from John Hanlon's ear. "That's the worst sound I've ever heard," John Hanlon thought before he lapsed into unconsciousness. "Nice of you guys to leave your car here for me," Michael Platt mumbled giddily as he stepped over the corpses of Grogan and dove towards the open driver's door of the white Buick. He had suffered a tremendous amount of blood loss, and it was starting to make him lightheaded. Ed Mireles, lying behind McNeil's car with his ruined left arm, watched as Michael Platt prepared to get in the two dead agents' vehicle. Mireles had not yet used the 12-gauge 870 because Grogan and Dove had been in his line of fire. Now they lay dead. Mireles pointed the shotgun in Platt's general direction with his right hand and pulled the trigger, firing his first shot of the firefight. The gun was hard to hold well one-handed, and the shot string was low. It skipped off the asphalt and put four .33 caliber .000 buckshot pellets into Michael Platt's left foot. Mireles pulled himself to a sitting position. He was still well concealed behind McNeil's cruiser. Platt thought dreamily about how it felt good to sit down as he slid behind the wheel and closed the door. His foot was throbbing from the buckshot wounds. Ed Mireles watched as Platt prepared to drive off in Ben Grogan's car. He put the butt of the 870 on the asphalt, gritted his teeth, held the receiver between his knees, and worked the action with his one good hand. Then he steadied the shotgun on McNeil's rear bumper and pulled the trigger. Instantly, he saw the holes made by the 9.000 pellets appear in the sheet metal in front of the Buick's left door. That's not going to do it, Mireles thought as he turned away, put the butt on the ground again, and pumped the action. As the wounded agent with the ruined left arm was cycling the weapon, Maddox ran to the passenger door of the white Buick and joined Michael Platt in the front seat. So the other one's still alive, too, Mireles thought as he rested the Remington's forend on the corner of the bumper and took careful aim down the barrel. He lined up the front sight bead with where he thought Platt's. Left nipple should be, and then squeezed the trigger. That's more like it, Mireles thought, as he saw Platt thrown back in the seat from the impact of the buckshot striking him in the face. Now to get the other one. Shit, where is that fucker? Michael Platt asked his partner as he spit a tooth and one of the buckshot pellets out of his mouth. Mireles had ideal cover behind McNeil's vehicle. Platt tried to turn the key in the ignition, but his right arm and hand would not work properly. One of Risner's 9mm silver tips had gone clear through his right forearm. Platt reached over and tried to turn the key with his left hand. Maddox was trying to help him when Mireles' next load of buckshot blasted through the windshield. Platt and Maddox both were sprayed with buckshot and broken glass. Mireles methodically pumped the shotgun's action again, chambering the final 12-gauge shell, and took aim as he had before. One more through the windshield, he decided. Get the guy in the passenger seat. Another 9-pellet load of .000 buckshot roared out of the Remington and blasted through the Buick's windshield, spraying Maddox in the face. Mireles saw the man thrown backwards. Then the big agent dropped the empty shotgun and slumped to the side. Michael Platt looked at Maddox's ruined face. Guy's dead meat, he mumbled to his friend and threw open the door. Agent Grogan and Agent Dove did not see what happened next, for they were both dead, each shot 4 times by Michael Platt with his Ruger Mini-14. Agent Hanlon did not see what happened next, for he was lying unconscious with his pelvis destroyed and his right arm shattered by 2 shots out of Michael Platt's rifle. Agent McNeil did not see what happened next, for he was lying on his back behind his own vehicle, paralyzed from the neck down and with his right hand a shattered mess from being shot twice by Michael Platt with his. 223. Agent Mireles did not see what happened next, for he was slumped facing away from the white Buick, with his left forearm destroyed by a bullet out of Michael Platt's rifle. Agent Manauzi did not see what happened next, for he was still looking for his lost revolver while forcing himself to ignore the glass and bullet fragments that had burrowed into his flesh when Michael Platt had fired his rifle through the window at him. Agent Arantia did not see what happened next, for he was hunkered down in the front seat of his car across the street, trying to get more cartridges out of the box in the glove compartment to reload his revolver, and gritting his teeth against the pain of a wound inflicted by Edward Matix's shotgun. Agent Risner did not see what happened next, for he was across the street, running behind his and Arantia's car and trying to find a spot where he could shoot at Platt and Matix without hitting Agent Mireles in the process. A private citizen watching from his apartment window saw what happened next. Michael Platt twisted a 6-inch S&W 357 Magnum out of his shoulder holster with his left hand. Michael Platt, who had 2 9mm slugs in his chest, 1 9mm slug through his right arm, several 9mm and 38 grazes, 4 .33 caliber lead buckshot in his left foot, and 6 more in his face, got out of the white Buick that had been issued to the late agents Grogan and Dove, and started walking towards Ed Morales. The private citizen would use the word stealthily to describe the manner in which Michael Platt walked towards Ed Morales. Intellectually, the citizen knew that Platt's gait was a result of his wounds, but he would never shake the image of Platt sneaking up on the unsuspecting agent. Michael Platt stopped 2 paces from where Morales was slumped. Platt felt his vision clouding as he stared at the big man's broad back. He held the L-frame Smith & Wesson awkwardly out in front of him with his left hand and pulled the trigger 3 times. Then Platt turned and limped back to the Buick. All 3 shots missed. Ed Morales did not hear the 3 shots fired 5 feet from him, or feel the concussion of the muzzle blasts. He was in a private world of planning and determination. When Ed Morales got to his feet and drew his revolver, he had no idea that Platt had gotten out of the car, walked over to him, fired 3 shots, and returned to the driver's seat. He only knew that Platt and Maddox were still alive. Morales drew his .357 revolver, which he had not yet fired, and held it out in front of him as he walked towards the driver's door of the white Buick. His vision was getting black around the edges, and Morales knew that tunnel vision was a sure sign that loss of consciousness was imminent. Front sight, Morales thought as he focused on the front blade, put it over the center of Platt's face, and squeezed the trigger. Pinwheel, he thought as he saw Platt's head jerk. One more. Morales repeated the process a second time as he continued to walk towards the car. When he was close enough to the car to see Maddox with his ruined face in the passenger seat, Morales switched targets and fired 3 more times, hitting Maddox in the head with each 158 grain lead hollow point. Last one's for you, Morales thought as he stopped a few inches from the door of the Buick and fired his 6th round into Platt's face at a distance of 1 foot. The first round out of Morales' revolver had killed Michael Platt. The other 3 had been superfluous. Platt had seen the big man coming towards him with the gun extended, but he had been momentarily stunned at the sight, for he had been sure he had just killed him moments before. Michael Platt had fired a fair amount of ammo in his lifetime, but there was one shooting exercise he had never once practiced. He had never done any point shooting with his weak hand. April 19th, 1986. So what does this Hughes Amendment you're talking about mean exactly? Stokely Meyer asked when he saw Henry Bowman and his uncle Max Collins enter the store. Henry Bowman sighed. No one's really sure. Word I get is that it was added in the last 30 seconds of discussion by a voice vote, and there's strong evidence that parliamentary rules weren't followed, so some people think maybe it'll be overturned. I think whatever it is, it won't be tossed out. It involves people who own machine guns, and we're an embarrassment to both sides. He closed his eyes for a moment before continuing. The wording, if the version I heard was accurate, is redundant. It doesn't make anything illegal that isn't already. So what's the problem? The problem is, we know what Hughes wanted, even if he wasn't smart enough or know enough about guns and gun laws to have it written out properly, before jumping up and down and waving his hands in the last minute of discussion. What the amendment says is that after the effective date, there shall be no machine gun transfers, quote, except under the authority of an agency of the United States government, unquote. Well, every machine gun transfer is already done on a federal form signed and approved by the Director of the Treasury, and has been ever since June of 1934. So, what's the problem? The problem is, we know that what Hughes meant is no transfers of guns made after the effective date, except to an agency of the U.S. government. He wanted to freeze the supply. BATF is going to start rejecting all transfer forms for machine guns made after the effective date, except to police and government agencies, and there's nothing we can do about it. Is freezing the supply really so bad? Asked a man Henry did not know. I mean, aren't there enough machine guns in the system for you to get what you want? Tom Fleming expelled his breath in a loud bark of derision at the man's comment, then quoted Winston Churchill. Those who appease a tiger do so in the hope that the tiger will eat them last. Henry Bowman nodded, then decided to answer the man's question. The politicians have just accomplished something they have never been able to do before. They have taken a whole class of small arms and made it so that no newly manufactured ones can be owned by private citizens ever again. Hughes or anyone else can now easily claim there are more than enough shotguns and rifles around to justify the same kind of law on them. Remington has produced about 3,870,000 shotguns alone. That's 30 times as many of just one model of shotgun as all the machine guns put together. Are you starting to realize that maybe the things you like are at risk too, and not just mine? The man looked embarrassed, but said nothing. There have been approximately 100,000 Class III firearms placed on the civilian registry since June of 1934. In that 50-year time period, not a single machine gun transferred on a federal form has ever been used by its owner in a crime of violence. Not one. But that record wasn't good enough for William Hughes. Paying $200 to the Treasury each time they change hands wasn't good enough for William Hughes. Making the applicants get fingerprinted, photographed, and investigated by the FBI wasn't good enough for William Hughes. Having no machine guns at all in the hands of honest residents of Hughes' home state, because New Jersey has a state prohibition on them, wasn't good enough for William Hughes. Henry stared at the man who had asked him the question. No government agency ever invented a decent machine gun. Every truly outstanding small arms design I know of was the work of an individual gun designer, usually working without a nickel of government money until after they bought his design, except maybe in Comblock countries. John Browning, in his workshop in Utah, gave us the 1895 Colt, the 1917 water-cooled, the Bar, the 1919-4, the M2, the water-cooled, 50, the M2 heavy-barreled, 50, and the 37mm automatic cannon. That was just one guy. Throw in all of Hiram Maxim's guns next. Then the Vickers, the Thompson, the Kalashnikov. Russians would have been screwed without him. All Gene Stoner's guns like the AR-10 and AR-15. Degtyarev's designs, Václav Halik's ZB-26 and the Bren copy of it, Hugo Schmeisser's guns and all the copies of them, the Sten, the Patchett, Uzi Elgal's 9mm Uzi, and 308 Galil, the Steyr AUG, hell, every one of them. Henry shook his head in frustration. The United States canceled most of its future full auto small arms development in 1934 with the National Firearms Act, by making inventors pay $200 a year, and it was development that our country was getting for free. When $200 finally got to where it wasn't that big a deal, some of that development picked up again, like Gene Stoner in the 50s. Now this Hughes guy has canceled it altogether. He ought to be charged with treason. Henry was livid. Barring that, Henry Bowman said softly, I'd like to handcuff him to one of the steel I-beam supports in my basement and wire him for sound. Stokely Meyer's head jerked up and he stared wide-eyed. He had never before seen his friend become truly angry at anyone. He was seeing it now, and he well understood it. One of these days, Pete Malloy said, this is really going to blow up in their faces. Pete was a retired cop that hung around the gun store on Saturdays. And speaking of that, Tom Fleming said, I got a bunch of dope from my buddy Evan last night about the FBI shootout in Miami. Everyone in the shop turned to look at the lawyer. Tom Fleming currently ran police firearms training courses with Rufus Ingram and gave lectures on legal aspects to police departments. He had also headed a military police agency in Illinois when he was in the Army. On matters involving police procedures and police weapons training, Tom and Rufus were the two most knowledgeable people Henry knew. Rufus was ex-SAS. What's the story? Henry asked. FBI got clobbered is the short version, Fleming said, and they're scrambling like hell to keep from looking like bumbling idiots. First of all, they set up this 10-car surveillance looking for 2 bank robbers that they know always carry at least one AR-15 and several handguns, and who they know have already killed several people. 14 FBI agents get in 10 air-conditioned cars to go cruising around looking for well-armed known killers, and not one of them has a rifle-rated vest. Not one. They all have pistol-rated vests, but get this, only one guy bothers to put his on. The rest have him lying on the seats. One of the fibbies spots the bad guys 15 minutes after they start looking for them, and what does he do? Tailgates them in the middle of a residential area, and then calls in a bunch of the other cars. Then two of the cars rammed the suspect car. "What?" Henry said. "That's just what I said." "What?" "That's exactly what Evans said. He works in Detroit, and they stop 8 or 10 cars a night. Cruiser wouldn't last a whole day using those tactics." Anyway, 3 FBI cars ram these guys off the road. But before they do, 2 of the agents thoughtfully take their guns out of their holsters and put them on the car seats. So the guns fly off the seats and get lost as soon as the agents start the ram-a-thon. One of those 2 isn't even carrying a backup gun, so he's running around the whole time looking for his revolver while bullets are whizzing through the air. "Couple of agents got killed, I heard on the news, along with the bank robbers. Also, didn't they fire some crazy number of shots?" Stokely asked. "Over 140, Tom Fleming replied. One of the guys who got killed had a .459 Smith and fired it dry twice. Only got 1 hit that they know of out of 29 shots, and died with the slide locked back." "Jesus, how far away was everybody? 100 yards?" Henry asked. "Most semi-auto handguns weren't good for better than 18 groups at that distance under ideal conditions." Henry was visualizing the FBI agents pitted at long distance against someone with a rifle. 6 of the 8 agents, including both of the ones that were killed, were between 6 and 20 feet from the 2 suspects. The other 2 Fibbies were about 25 yards away, shooting from across the street. 1 hit out of 29 from less than 20 feet? Henry shook his head. "Sounds like spray and pray big time," he said finally. "What kind of guns were the feds using?" 3 459 seconds, 3 357 Smiths, 2 38 Smith Model 10 seconds, 2 Chief Specials as backup guns, 1 870 Remington. Out of 8 agents, 7 of them don't wear body armor, and 6 of them only had 1 handgun?" Henry asked. "Going after known killers who had centerfire rifles?" He was incredulous. "Why only 1 shotgun? Why no rifles or subguns?" "Funny you should ask that. There was a second shotgun there. The supervisor had it. It was in the back of his car where he couldn't get to it without exposing himself to being shot. When he tried to, one of the bad guys put a 223 round in his neck that bounced off his spine and left him paralyzed for a few hours." Tom Fleming laughed at what he was about to say next. "Subguns, you asked? As a matter of fact, the FBI did have 2 HNK MP5s in one of the cars. Problem was, the 2 agents that had them were busy double-teaming some broad at the restaurant where she worked. They didn't get their pants up in time to get to the gunfight." Henry was incredulous. "Wait a minute," he demanded. "I thought you said the feds found the suspects 15 minutes after they started their surveillance." Henry's uncle spoke up. "I guess those 2 agents got started early on breakfast." At 73, Max Collins was still powerfully built and in excellent shape, but his sex drive had declined as he had aged. It had gotten to where every other day was plenty. Fleming saw Henry Bowman's expression. "I keep telling you, Henry, it's the biggest problem Rufus and I have doing our training courses. Cops get used to people doing whatever they tell them to. They get used to routine. That's why they are absolutely undone when they come up against someone that doesn't do what they're supposed to." "He's right, Henry," Pete Malloy said. "And I was a cop for 27 years. A lot of faith in the badge and all the backup. Every cop has to cool down drunk assholes that want to take a swing at him. That's what the mail order pacifier's for. Very few coppers ever come across some hard-on that's ready to kill him even if he dies in the process. I know I never did. Every cop I ever knew came across someone like that is dead now." Malloy thought a moment. "You had better gunfight training on that trip to Rhodesia than any police officer in this country." Before Henry could answer, Tom Fleming spoke again. "Pete, you hear about those 2 Secret Service agents on the stakeout in San Diego, I think it was? The one staking out the place where some counterfeiters were printing up food stamps? Everybody knows that story." "That the one where they were screwing and got mugged?" Stokely asked. "What are you talking about?" Henry demanded. "Couple of Secret Service agents, man and a woman, got assigned to watch this place where some guys were holed up," Pete Malloy explained. "Guys were suspected of printing up food stamp coupons, starting their own welfare program. Next day, the 2 agents don't call in. Secret Service can't find him. Meanwhile, local coppers have come on a car with 2 dead bodies in it, mugging victims. No ID on the bodies, so they get hauled off to the morgue and the car gets towed away. VIN number says the car's registered to the government. Coroner's report comes in. Couple was fucking in the car. Some dirtbag killed him. Took their money and wallets. Meanwhile, Secret Service is still trying to find their 2 stakeout agents. Then word finally filters back to the Secret Service that 1A, their cars is in the impound lot, and they finally find the missing stakeout team down at the morgue with toe tags. They were screwing in the car and the counterfeiters snuck up on them and killed them? Henry asked. Hell no, Pete roared. Service tried 6 ways to Sunday to pin it on the food stamp guys, but they didn't have anything to do with it. They'd never been involved in a violent crime in their lives, just printing paper. No, the 2 agents were screwing in their car, and just like the report said, some stranger walked along, iced them for what they had in their wallets, then took their ID and all the guns in the car. Feds were lots more upset about losing 2 sets of creds than they were about losing 2 agents. The service never did find out who did it. Could have been anyone. Henry was still thinking hard about the ex-cop's last 2 statements when Max returned to the subject of the Miami incident. On this Florida thing, it's a fucking miracle no one around got hit by a stray bullet. 140 rounds fired in less than 5 minutes in the middle of a residential area in Miami and no one around gets hit. That's an act of God. And speaking of that, Pete Malloy asked, Tom, can you imagine what the FBI would have said if it had been the local Miami coppers that had gone after known, heavily armed killers and left their vests and shotguns in the back seats of their cars, then rammed the suspect's vehicle to precipitate a 140-round gun battle in the middle of a residential neighborhood? Fleming considered the concept, then tucked his chin into his chest and lowered his voice when he replied. A spokesman for the FBI said, these actions show that local municipal police departments do not have the knowledge, training, or expertise to handle highly motivated, heavily armed career criminals with a history of deadly violence. That is why the apprehension of such dangerous men should always be left to the trained professionals of the FBI whenever possible. Fleming switched back to his normal voice and added, you could actually argue that the FBI guys got off easy. The suspect, who did almost all the damage, used a Ruger Mini 14. He killed the 2 cops, bounced around off the supervisor's spine and paralyzed him for a few hours, wounded 1 agent with fragments when he shot him through his car window, hit 2 guys in their gun hands, and smashed 1 Fed's left arm when he had it in front of his heart. Guy hit in the arm was the one who ended up finally killing both of the suspects. Worked his shotgun one-handed and wounded them, then finished them off with 357 seconds to the brain from a few feet away when they were in an FBI car trying to escape. Henry saw his friend's point immediately, so if the suspect had been shooting a real gun, Henry said, thinking out loud. Like a Garand, Max broke in. Yeah, like a Garand, he would have shot right through that Fed's arm and into his heart. And the Fed wouldn't have been alive to kill him. Right. And if he'd been shooting a Garand, he would have killed the guy he hit in the neck too, instead of just putting him on the sidelines for a few hours. Yeah, like a Garand, he would have shot right through that Fed's arm and into his heart. And the Fed wouldn't have been alive to kill him. Right. And if he'd been shooting a Garand, he would have also killed the guy he shot through the window glass instead of just peppering him with fragments, because a .30 caliber ball round wouldn't have come apart. Yeah, like a Garand, he would have shot right through that Fed's arm and into his heart. And the Fed wouldn't have been alive to kill him. Right. So now we've got 5 dead agents instead of 2, and one of the remaining 3 is still running around looking for his gun, so he's no threat. And I take it the suspects were not wearing body armor, and if they had been, they would have sustained far fewer wounds? Right again on all counts. Shit, Max Collins said. When Frank Hamer killed Bonnie and Clyde in the 30s, they found all kinds of stuff in the Model A. Couple bars, bunch of pistols, and a shitload of ammunition. Couple thousand rounds, as I recall. You're kidding, Pete Malloy said. No, I'm sure of it. You know, Stokely Meyer added, we got a book here on Frank Hamer I was reading the other day. He grinned, walked over to the bookshelf, and opened a volume. It took him a few seconds to find the spot he was looking for. Over a dozen guns and over 5,000 rounds of ammo. 3 bars with 100 loaded magazines, which shows a certain sense of style for a couple of inbred Okies. Also 7 .45 autos with a bunch of loaded mags. He looked up at the group. I guess bank robbers in the 30s were a little more hardcore than they are today. Henry and Tom looked at each other. Henry thought that John Browning's bar was the finest small arms development in history. Tom Fleming felt the same way about the Browning design. .45 automatic. The feds lucked out that only 2 of them are dead, Max declared. You could say that, Tom Fleming admitted. They lucked out one other way too, Pete Malloy added. The group turned to look at the retired cop. The feds went after a couple of bank robbers. Bank robbers are pretty uncommon, and nobody I know has any sympathy for them. Everyone in the shop knew what Pete was getting at. It was an issue that was being discussed that afternoon in gun stores all around the country. If this is what happens when the feds go after a couple of bank robbers who know they're in the wrong, what's going to happen to the feds when they go after a couple million trained, motivated, heavily armed citizens who haven't done anything worse than exercise their constitutional rights?